How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
is the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. This is the final scene of
You know, every time I play that intro video, I see the typo on the last slide, and I keep saying, "Karlyn, you gotta fix that typo." And I'm like, I keep saying, I'm like, I need to update the intro video anyway, so I'll fix the typo when I update the intro video, and then I update the intro video, and then I forget to fix the typo. Anyway, such as it is. See, you never even saw it, and now you're gonna look for it. Now you're gonna go back and look for it, which means I definitely have to update it before the next stream tomorrow. Oh, so this is our second stream of the day. Welcome. I'm gonna turn my mic down a little bit because I think I was peaking when I was yelling at that guy on the last stream. You know, we're gonna do kind of revolutionary book club today, but can I just talk for a second? Can I just talk? I feel like the world has just gone absolutely completely insane, and it's like, you know, I told you guys yesterday about the joke I made about Jewish Coke. And now the post I made on Twitter making a joke about Jewish Coke is up over 2 million views. And I'm not taking it down, and I don't regret anything, and the Jews on Twitter can complain all they want. I don't really care. But it is absolutely mind-boggling to me how many Jews I have in my feed right now calling me anti-Semitic and every name in the book because I made a joke about Jewish soda. And it's like, how on earth do you expect me to ever be on your side? You are running around lying about me. You're smearing me. You're calling me anti-Semitic when I was literally watching the Jewish video for fun in the first place. They're running around saying things like, "You're so obsessed with the Jews. All you ever talk about is the Jews." That's interesting. Because I create well over a dozen hours, if not 24, getting up close to 24 hours of content every single week of videos talking about the far left. I have written multiple books this year talking about the far left. I have written hundreds of articles about the far left. We have made hundreds, if not into the thousands, of video clips talking about the far left. Has anyone on the internet ever said to me, ever, "Karlyn, you know, you're just too obsessed with the far left"? Has anyone ever said that to me? No. It's always, You're obsessed with this person. You're obsessed with that person. You're obsessed with the Jews. You're obsessed with this. You're obsessed with this thing that's my favorite thing in the world. And I'm just like, if any of you retards actually looked at my actual feed, or the feeds of any of the other Twitter accounts that I run, or the feeds of accounts from people in my community, or my YouTube channel, or my Substack, or my Rumble channel, or any other platform that I have on the internet, what you're going to see is that I'm obsessed with the far left. That is what I primarily create content about. I may talk about different things here or there, but guess what, Jews? I'm allowed to have a fucking life, and I'm allowed to have opinions that you don't like, and just because I state opinions you don't like on the internet doesn't mean I'm obsessed with you. Do the Jews want everyone to be obsessed with them? Do the Jews have some sort of complex where they need to create scenarios where everyone fucking hates them? Because again, I've told this story a million times. Never in my life have I cared if someone was Jewish. Never in my life have I given a flying flip if someone was Jewish. And then the Jews just kept fucking with my shit. PragerU lied about me. PragerU planted a hit piece on me. PragerU completely bent me over and fucked me. And I didn't even put two and two together when it happened. I was just like, oh yeah, this is just typical conservative bullshit. It wasn't until way later that I understood that they were being very fucking Jewish. And then October 7th happened, and then all of a sudden, you were under some obligation to support Israel, and I was like, I am a fucking American. I don't need to support any foreign country for any reason. And you know what was so ironic was it was after everyone had a hissy fit constantly about like oh, you've got a Ukrainian flag in your bio. I remember when I actually put a Ukrainian flag in my bio because I am married to a Ukrainian. My husband is from Ukraine. He grew up in Ukraine. His family is in Ukraine. His brother is in the Ukrainian army. And I, for a brief moment, had a Ukrainian flag in my Twitter bio. Do you guys understand the amount of how dare you have that flag? I was like, I'm married to a fucking Ukrainian. But then October 7th happens, and all of a sudden I'm obligated to have some sort of fucking Israeli flag in my profile and support everything the Israelis do? No, I'm not. And then God forbid, oh my God, she became friends with Nick Fuentes. As if we're not allowed in our lives to have friends and allies that we might disagree with on a thing or two. And by the way, I don't even think Nick is hateful of Jews. I don't think he is. I think Nick makes spicy jokes that are funny, but I don't think he's hateful of Jews. I think he has a lot of questions about Jewish power and control. I think he has a lot of questions about the control that Bibi Netanyahu seems to have in Washington, D.C. Why the fuck does Bibi Netanyahu get to dictate what we do for anything? We are supposed to be America. I have no problem with making strategic alliances, but Israel is not a strategic alliance for the United States. Israel doesn't do shit for the United States. And Israel expects us to give them billions of dollars a year. Israel expects us to go to war with Iran for them, which is going to kill Americans for them. How many of you are ready to send your sons and daughters to Iran to die for Israel and Bibi Netanyahu? I don't think that's a good idea. I don't support it. I've been anti-war literally my entire life. But no, if I express any of this online, Karlyn, you're obsessed with the Jews. You're obsessed with the Jews. You're obsessed with the Jews. Of course, they can never provide any evidence of this. And then when I say, actually, if you checked my Twitter feed or the Twitter accounts that I run or my YouTube channel or my Rumble channel or my Substacks or any other place on the internet, I cover the far left. No, you're obsessed with the Jews. It's like, shut the fuck up. And if you're going to lie about something that is so easily proven wrong, if you are going to lie about something that there is a mountain of public evidence that isn't even hard to find, how many other things are you lying about? If you're going to ignore all the content I do about the far left because it doesn't fit your fucking narrative, how many other things are you ignoring? How many other people have you done this to just to feed your Jewish fucking victimhood complex? Everyone hates us. Well, there's a fucking reason everyone hates you. There is a fucking reason that everyone hates you. You are the friend that shows up always asking for other people's money, complaining when you don't get other people's money, and then going out and smearing and bad-mouthing people because they didn't want to give you any more money because, by the way, you never fucking pay them back and you never do anything for them. It's all just about you. The other people never get anything in return. You don't actually care about them. You don't help them with any of their projects. You don't show up for them, but you expect to be able to show up and take and take and take and take. And if someone doesn't give you what you want, you then go and lie about them all over the fucking internet. And then you say, you're a Jew hater. You're a Jew hater. No, asshole. You caused this through your behavior. I never cared that you were Jewish. I cared that you behaved like an unhinged retard. I don't know what is so difficult for people to understand about this. Anti-Semitism is created by Jewish behavior. If you were not acting like entitled elitist assholes, then people would have no fucking reason to hate you. If you weren't bombing the shit out of Palestine every single day with videos coming out of all these people dying, children getting parts of their body blown up. I saw a video earlier on Twitter of a baby who had to get their hand amputated because Israel dropped a bomb on the building that baby was in. If you don't want people to hate you, maybe stop doing that shit. And then demanding not even doing that, not even just that they're killing tens of thousands of people in Gaza, not just that it is obvious that they want all the Palestinians off that property so they can claim the land for themselves. It's not even just that. It's that they demand that we pay for it. They demand that we go to war on their behalf. And then when we say, no, this is your fucking problem. This is not our problem, Jews. This is your problem. We are not the one who started this shit. You started this shit. When we say no, that you're a Jew hater, you're a Jew hater, you're a Jew hater, you're a Jew hater, you're an anti-Semite. Go fuck yourselves. Who the fuck do you think you are? Well, they're God's chosen people. They can say and do whatever the fuck they want with no consequence. Imagine actually living an existence in which you feel entitled to other people's money, other people's resources, other people's energy, and if they don't give it to you willingly, you go around smearing them and lying about them and defaming them, and then you have the fucking gall to say they hate you for no fucking reason. There is a reason. There is a reason. You are not the victims of the world, Jews. You are not. And I'm so fucking sick of hearing it. Anyway, I don't really have anything else to say on that other than things that I've already said over and over and over and over and over again. And I don't know. You guys want to read some socialism? Anyone want to read some socialism? probably scare people away. They're like, Karlyn's yelling about the Jews, and eventually, and I promise you this: everything that I just said is going to get clipped and put on the internet, and people are going to say, look, Karlyn's obsessed with the Jews. And it doesn't matter that we're about to spend hours reading Queer Anarchism. That doesn't matter, because the narrative is, you are obsessed with the Jews if you don't agree with everything we say and do. Anyway, let's read some leftism, shall we, guys? Welcome to the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. It is a counter-revolutionary book club type of day. If you have never done Counter-Revolutionary Book Club with us before, head over to my Substack, Karlyn, Karlyn, .substack.com. When you get there, you're going to want to click this book club link up in the menu. The book club link is going to take you to, predictably, the book club page. When you get to the book club page, you're going to look for this document right here, the Dystopian Documents Queer and Gender Activists Are Reading. You're going to open that document, and this is the list that we are working through for our book club. You can also find back episodes of the book club. You can subscribe to the book club on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or you could do it through the Substack app, which I think is probably best for most people. And then once you get to this page, you're going to scroll down, and you're going to look for a document called Queering Anarchism. This document came out in 2012. This is a book that is a collection of essays. It is a massively large book. We're going to be working on Queering Anarchism for a while, just so people know. Queering Anarchism is basically taking over the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. And the reason that is this book just lays it all out. It is uploaded now, so you should go back and check. This book lays it all out. This book has everything in it. This book has marriage and polyamory. This book has police. This book has disability and crip studies. This book has all the gender stuff. This book has a bunch of the queer stuff that we get into. This book has literally everything in it. Look at this. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. We have just gotten started reading it, so if you missed last week's episode and you feel like you can't just jump into it with us, no, you can. You can. This is, first of all, this is an essay collection. Every different essay is going to be different. It's written by a different author. And so you can literally jump into or out of this book at any time, and it's going to be okay. Last week, all we read was the introduction. We got almost all the way through the introduction. We just have to do the last little bit of it called Queering Anarchism. And then we are going to go into this essay, which is about gay marriage and queer love. And we're going to see how long that takes us. We could do another essay if we have additional time, but typically it does take us a while to work our way through these documents because we break them down, we stop, we talk about it. People in the chat can offer their feedback on what they think the document means, and we can have a conversation about it. So I kind of would like to stick to maybe doing one essay at a time. Maybe we can do two if they're shorter essays, but I think that one essay at a time is more than enough because this stuff is really much weightier than the normal stuff we cover because we are reading their writings, which tend to be a little bit more academic in nature. So it's okay to go slow, and it's okay to kind of pause and break it down a little bit. So that is what we're going to be doing today, guys. And if you want to follow along, let me put the link to the Anarchist Library in the chat. All these documents are freely available publicly online, which is mind-boggling to me because no one on the right ever talks about them, but we'll talk about them. We'll do the work no one else wants to do. That's totally fine. As a reminder, if you want to support the work I'm doing, head back over to the Substack. That is Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. Sign up for $8 a month, $80 a year. I am 100% funded by you. If you don't support my work, it ain't going to happen. If you guys enjoy the book club, but you don't support the book club, then the book club probably will stop existing at some point. That's the way this has to work because I do not want to be beholden to any political entity. None. Not on the right, not on the left. My only job is to show up and to talk to you guys and to tell you the truth and to show you receipts of what's going on. And so in order to make that happen, we need to create a grassroots movement to be able to fund my ability to do this. The best way you can contribute is by heading over to the Substack, signing up for $8 a month, $80 a year, less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I'm pretty sure I paid $10 for a cup of coffee at Starbucks the last time I was there. So less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. and you guys keep me in business, and I really do appreciate it. Another way you can support the work I'm doing is by heading over to Amazon and picking up my latest book, which we're going to do kind of like the official launch on Saturday for my birthday. As a reminder, Saturday is my birthday. I'm turning 29 again. I expect everyone to show up for Socialism Saturday and celebrate me, and I also expect everyone to buy my book, okay? Buying my book is one of the best birthday presents you can give me. Buying my book and reading my book is even better. And honestly, I'm pretty sure it's a pretty good book, so I think you guys will like it. We have our first retard in the chat! Just because they call themselves socialist or anarchist doesn't mean they are that. Let's take a look at your channel history, shall we? Let's take a look at your channel history. Let's see. Oh, you've never been here before. You've never been here before. Imagine my shock. Do you know, retard, which is what we're going to call you until you start listening and responding like an educated adult. Do you know what we do on this channel? Do you have any idea what we do on this channel? Do you understand that we spend all our time listening to the radical revolutionary far left? Do you understand? Actually, retard, since you know everything, can you tell us a little bit about this book? Can you introduce us to this book, please? We'll wait for you in the chat, KB's on. You know everything? Tell us about this book. Educate us. We're waiting. Have you read this book? Do you know anything about the people who have written this book? Do you know anything about the essays in this book? Can you define what queer Marxism is? Do you know why queer activists use polyamory to queer the nuclear family? Do you know what the queer activists have planned for the nuclear family? Do you know what the queer activists believe about gender? Do you know what the queer activists, do you know how queer is related to disability studies? We will wait for you to explain all of this to us since you know everything. If you do not say something in 30 seconds, you're getting permanently banned from my chat. That's the game you started when you came in to try to tell me what to do. Do you know anything or don't you? Do you have anything valuable to add to the chat? We're waiting. You have 15 seconds. Do you know how the left defines capitalism? Do you have any idea? Do you have any idea? How does the left define capitalism? Can you answer any question at all? You have 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Imagine having the nerve to come into my chat and honestly and sincerely say, you don't know what socialism is, and just because they say they're socialists doesn't mean they are. Imagine having the gall to come into my chat and do that, and you have no fucking idea how the left defines capitalism. Imagine having the gall to claim to tell me what queer Marxists believe when you don't even know what queer Marxism is, when you have nothing valuable to add at all. So, since we haven't heard from our retarded friend is getting permanently banned from the chat. Goodbye. That's how we handle things. If you're not here to learn, if you want to be disruptive, if you want to use my chat to push your personal political beliefs, which usually, almost always, are completely unhinged from reality, then we will remove you and we will take away your ability to talk and you will not be disruptive anymore. Anyway. I had a retard replying to my thread trying to tell me off for being a dem hater. Essentially, yeah. Their final attempt to own you was to tell you you don't know what socialism is. Listen, man, I'll tell you what. When you really start deep diving into the far left and you become an expert in the far left, in which I have and actually many people who watch my content have, some of the things you hear come out of the mouths of conservatives and right-wingers, it is mind-boggling. It is actually mind-boggling, some of the things that these people have the gall to say. They're insane. Stop listening to anyone. Just look at the primary sources. And that includes me, by the way. Everything I say is backed up with primary sources. I always show you the primary sources. You can go directly to the primary sources yourself. You don't need me to read this book with you. You can read this on your own. Never listen to anyone else on the internet. Anyone at all, including me. Go to the primary sources and see yourself, because everyone on the internet is fucking insane. You order the book? My book on capital. Did I write a book on capital? I've written books on racism. I've written a book debunking the Communist Manifesto. I just wrote a fairy tale. Do you mean you wrote this book? You ordered this book? I don't know when I wrote a book on capital. Did you order it from someone else? Hey, listen, if you ordered my book, I really do appreciate it. All right. How do these people spend their time? Making shit up. You want to know how conspiracy theories get started? People on the internet who are unhinged from reality. Anyway, guys, we are going to be jumping in to Queering Anarchism. I'm going to be reading it in having the text-to-speech reader read it, so I don't have to read the whole thing. The first thing we need to do is finish up the last chapter that we started, because we ran out of time last time. So the first thing we need to do is read this Queering Anarchism section. And then we're going to go right into this essay about gay marriage and queer love. So that is what we're going to do. Oh, you got debunking the Communist Manifesto? Well, listen, I hope you enjoy it. I actually do plan to release a version of Capital at some point, of Marxist Capital, but that's kind of like in the plans. Because I'm releasing, basically what I'm doing is I'm re-releasing all of the public domain Marxist texts, but you can give me money to buy them if you want. And so it's kind of like my middle finger to the communists. So I will actually be releasing Capital at some point. But not yet. So that actually is something that's going to happen. All right, guys, we are digging into our Queering Anarchism book. Let me get the sound set up. I really wish more people would come to Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. I have to say, I wish more. Here is the question. Oh yeah, the Jews have lost their fucking minds over Jewish soda. Yeah. Here is the question. How do we get James Lindsay's audience to come over here to Counter-Revolutionary Book Club? Because in theory, James Lindsay's audience is interested in more academic texts, but they're all completely unhinged from reality because James doesn't actually read them the real stuff. And I don't know the answer to this question. I'm just putting it out there for people to think about. How do we poach from that audience? How do we poach from the anti-woke influencers who are lying to people to get them to come over here and actually listen to the real stuff? Again, I don't have an answer right this second, but maybe one of you will have some ideas. And so if you have some ideas, it's totally okay to say it. All right, guys, we are going to dig into Queering Anarchism now. This is part 2 of our plentiful series on Queering Anarchism. We need to finish up this first chapter, and then we will go into a chapter about marriage and queer marriage and all that stuff, and we will find out what they think about that. But let's get this party started.
Queering Anarchism.
Oh, hang on. No. Let me make this extremely and abundantly clear. I would rather have no audience at all. I would rather be put in a position where I need to quit doing all of this stuff than ever coddle the feelings of thin-skinned retards who are not capable of following along with basic information. So allow me to be very clear about what I'm saying. I do not want anyone in my audience who expects me to coddle their feelings and tell them what they want to hear to make them feel good. That's not going to happen. If you are serious about learning about the left, you're not going to behave like a retard in my chat. You're not going to argue with me. You're not going to pretend ever that you know more than me, because I promise you, you do not. There is a hierarchy on this channel, and I am at the top of the fucking hierarchy. When people come into my chat and cause problems and get dunked on and end up crying, it is because they have some sort of belief that they've usurped me in the hierarchy. That's not true. I am at the top of the fucking hierarchy at all times on my channel. There is no one that ever comes close, except for potentially Bot and Reagan and some other people who've been around for a while. They all have status. Some retarded conservative coming in off the streets thinking they're going to tell me what's socialism. They do not. No. They're going to get slapped down really quickly, and what's going to happen is they're either going to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and dust themselves off and learn real socialism, or they're going to run away crying like a fucking snowflake leftist. And I don't really care. If you're going to behave like a snowflake leftist, then I don't want you around. My audience doesn't want you around. None of us want you around. And I'm not saying that specifically of you, Space Jack. I know you're not I know that you're not asking for that. I'm saying in general. So I'm not making a personal claim towards you, okay? And yeah, this is why. People want to know why I'm so mean. Do you guys think the communists are going to be nice to you? Do you think the communists, when they show up to overthrow the government, are going to care about your feelings? Do you think when the communists show up to try to fuck over your kid's school, they're going to issue a survey so that you can write them a strongly worded letter about what you think and then take your feedback into consideration? Like, there is no reality in which I am meaner than the left is going to be to conservatives. But conservatives can't handle that because they're all weak, thin-skinned, fucking snowflakes that just want their feelings coddled. And I'm sorry, they're going to have a really hard time when they realize that the left doesn't give a flying fuck about their feelings. Anyway, let's get into the document.
Queering Anarchism. In this collection, one can find all of these uses of queer as a noun, an adjective, and a verb. Rather than trying to fit all of these pieces into a single, coherent definition of the word, we collected chapters knowing that they would at times be contradictory. For us, the purpose of this book was to create a collection that might move conversations forward, and that meant allowing for a huge range of approaches to queer, as well as a diversity of expressing those approaches. So the reader will also find pieces that queer the script, so to speak, attempting to use creative means to convey ideas outside of the format of theoretical essays. This process of collection and editing took over 3 years, spanned changes in the editorial collective, and likewise saw some authors stick with us throughout and some lose contact with us in that long process. When we first put the idea together, we decided that, like most edited collections, we would create discrete sections for the book. We sought out pieces of theory, writings on practice, and reflections on life experiences. In the end, however, we realized that nearly every chapter contained all 3 of these. So we tried to place them in an order that makes sense, showcases the diversity of thought in the collection, but isn't limited to discrete sections. They'd bleed completely into each other if we tried anyway. We did, however, try to create an order that would draw out familiar theoretical terrain and build on that in a process that, with any luck, will give readers a chance to situate the contents better as they travel through these chapters. We begin with Ryan Conrad, who has done quite a lot of work critiquing assimilationist strategies and the equality rhetoric of the mainstream gay and lesbian movement.
Okay, I just want to pause there. And obviously they're doing an overview of some of the essays we're going to find in this book, but this will actually be informative for how they think. So we're going to hear from Ryan, who has done a lot of work critiquing assimilationist strategies and equality rhetoric of the mainstream gay and lesbian movement. What does that mean? That means queer anarchists fundamentally reject the idea of assimilation because they're critiquing it. Assimilation means this is where homonormativity comes from. Homonormativity is the idea of gay people assimilating to the norms of the capitalist straights. And so queer anarchists don't differentiate between homonormative people and heteronormative people. because they're all the same. They're all upholding the norms of capitalism. That's what assimilationist means. They also, remember, this was written in 2012, or maybe some of these essays were written before that. This document was produced before the legalization of gay marriage. Queer anarchists were never in favor of gay marriage. They didn't want it. They were actively fighting against it. They were actively fighting against the organizations campaigning for it. So for all you conservatives, and I know my regular listeners have heard me say this a lot, but just in case a conservative has wandered into this channel, for everyone who thinks that repealing gay marriage is a good idea, you are going to give the queer anarchists exactly what they want. They want you to repeal gay marriage. And they and in some ways they're kind of counting on you to do it, because their side is not going to do it. But queer Marxists, queer anarchists, queer activists do not want gay marriage. They believe that gay marriage is an assimilationist strategy to get the gays to assimilate to the capitalist normative standards of the straights.
Conrad uses his critique of these assimilationist goals to suggest that we might expect much more than equality under the existing institutions. In fact, we might create a new world. J. Rogue spells out lessons anarchists might learn from the trans-feminist movement, suggesting ways that we might update our feminism and build an anarchist gender politics that is nuanced and holistic. Abby Volcano pens an intervention into radical queer politics, arguing to be watchful of inverting hierarchies and basing our politics solely on simplified oppositions. Stacy aka Solidarity reviews existing theories of gender, drawing out a queer anarchist analysis that can serve as a framework for paths out of our current gender practices and understandings. Jamie Heckert explores ways we might queer anarchism and make it strange. In the process, he expresses a need for a creative politics not solely defined by antagonistic oppositions. Farhang Rouhani tells the story of opening a queer social center and the messiness involved in attempting to create and maintain such spaces, where identity categories are simultaneously questioned, created, destabilized, and sometimes celebrated by participants. Jerry Marie Leesgang ties the struggle against the state together with the liberation of trans people and shows that the state is intimately involved in coercive gendering and gender assignment, suggesting that trans liberation requires the abolition of the state. Next, Benjamin Shepard argues for queering anarchist organizing that might lead us toward a politics of pleasure.
Queering anarchist organizing that would lead us to a politics of pleasure. Why do I feel like that means that all of the activists are going to have BDSM and kink-related orgies?
This links up nicely with harm reduction approaches to organizing for better worlds and thinking about queering politics to provide new ways of conceiving of political interventions. Gage Operasta argues that class struggle must be a central component of queer organizing, asserting in the process that class is not a simple identity, and that we need to organize as a class against capitalism. The CRAC collective queers the script, providing a comic that details conversations among people about how sexual and gender politics relate to their political activity and their lives as radicals and anarchists. Stephanie Grauman investigates how the economy is involved in our contemporary constructions of sexuality and gender and argues that we might queer the economy or shift our understanding of economics to recognize its place in other spheres of life, particularly our gendered and sexual lives. Sandra Jeppesen provides a personal narrative about how queering anarchism might happen in the lives of people who tend to have heterosexual relationships, but do not identify with straightness and heterosexuality. Finally, Susan Song writes about the intersections between polyamorous sexual practices and relations and anarchist politics. Diana C. S. Becerra writes a media analysis of sex and the city, paying close attention to how pop cultural forms construct our understanding of gender and sexuality. She compellingly argues that anarchists might use these kinds of analyses to pinpoint the ways that culture influences our understanding of ourselves and our relationships with others. C.B. Daring argues that anarchists should have an analysis of sex work that doesn't mirror the moralism that is often connected with radical analyses of labor in the sex industry. Jason Lydon ties in anarchist queer politics with a need for resisting the prison industrial complex. He puts forward an anarchist queer perspective on abolition. Liat Ben Moshe, Anthony J. Nocella, II, and A.J. Withers suggest that we recognize parallels between disability and queerness, making the case that we might not just queer anarchism, but queer crip anarchism, connecting fights against heteronormativity and other forms of oppression and exclusion with struggles against ableism.
Intersectionality.
Sappho Papantonopoulos contends that straightness is not an identity, but a set of social relations, and for liberation to be total and consistent with anarchist principles, those sets of social relations must be uprooted, exposed, and destroyed. Hex playfully relates BDSM practices to anarchism, using this relationship to draw out kinky paths to queering anarchism. We think the strong connections between anarchist and queer politics are striking. But, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We hope this collection serves as a smorgasbord of sorts, providing insights into how we might alter the landscape of this often miserable, violent, and boring world and bring into being different ones. We think the case here is supported quite well that there are many more fruitful engagements to emerge from this meeting of queer and anarchism, and a variety of other partnerships along the way.
All right, that brings us to the end of the first chapter. That was just a little bit we had to finish up from last time. We are going to be moving into our first essay. Let's see how long this essay is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it's actually pretty short. So we actually might be able to do a couple essays today because this one seems pretty short. It's only like 4 pages long. So that'll be good. It'll be good if we can break this up a little bit more. We are going to be starting the gay marriage and queer love essay, but there are a couple questions in the chat. Fellium says, should sex work be legal? What do you think, Karlyn? I mean, so listen, generally speaking, when we're doing counter-revolutionary book club or we're analyzing documents like this, generally speaking, I don't actually usually try to like insert my political opinion, and that's not because I don't have one. Obviously I do, and I'm going to tell you what it is, but the reason I don't try to insert it is because honestly it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what I think. It honestly doesn't matter what you think either. I have an incredibly diverse array of opinions and viewpoints in my audience. There are people of all different political groups, and I want people of all political groups to feel welcome here as long as you want to learn about the left. And I don't want people to think, because I know I can be a little aggressive and a little spicy sometimes, I don't want people to think that they have to agree with me on every issue in order to learn about the left, because that's just not how I see it at all. What do I think of sex work? I don't think the government should be regulating what we do with our body. I don't think it's any of the government's business what we do with our body. If you want to have sex with someone, regardless of whether you're doing it for free because you got drunk at the bar that night, or if he's paying you hundreds or thousands of dollars to do it, then you should be able to do that. It's not my job to dictate what other people do with their body. It's not your job. It's not the government's job. So do I think sex work should be legal? Yeah, I do. People can disagree with me on that, but you know, I just think like of all the problems in the world, people having voluntary consensual sex seems a pretty ridiculous thing to try to legislate against. And if you get effed over because you get a sexually transmitted disease or you get pregnant or something else happens, by the way, it's not our job to take care of you. It's not our job to pay your medical bills. It's not our job to pay for your abortion. It's not our job. It's also not the government's job to pay for any of the problems that you cause yourself by having indiscriminate pay for sex. I mean, it's like, you know. So that's how I feel about that topic. I also did see a chat from LG. LG, I want to thank you for coming back, because you haven't always been watching the socialism content with us. So it is, I appreciate you coming to Counter Revolutionary Book Club. This is a little bit heavier than what we normally do. LG says, please keep us updated when this text uses unconventional language, use of common words and language. I know you will do that, but reading this stuff is so hard. I do want to acknowledge that for people who are new to reading far left text, this can be really hard. But what I would say to you is this has got to be a two-way street, okay? If I stopped this document to explain every single unconventional word, we would be here all day. So I need your help in doing this, and this is not just to LG, but this is to everyone in the chat and people who might be listening to it afterwards. I need your help in that you need to tell me what you don't understand. And you can ask as many questions as you want. If you are asking questions in good faith and you just are trying to learn and you're trying to figure it out, we're not going to shit on you. We're not going to make fun of you. We really won't. We shit on people who do underhanded things. But if you're coming in good faith and you just want to ask questions, that's totally fine. But you need to tell me what you don't understand sometimes. And if you're telling me you don't understand it, I will go back and explain it. But I can't stop for every single unconventional word. I'll stop for the ones that I think of, but if I don't stop for the thing that you don't understand, you have to tell me you don't understand it so that we can then go back and stop for it, okay? All right. Let's get into Gay Marriage and Queer Love by Ryan Conrad.
Gay Marriage and Queer Love. Ryan Conrad. Love, the strongest and deepest element in all life, the harbinger of hope, of joy, of ecstasy. Love, the defier of all laws, of all conventions. Love, the freest, the most powerful molder of human destiny. How can such an all-compelling force be synonymous with that poor little state and church-begotten weed, marriage? Emma Goldman, Marriage and Love. Mainstream gay and lesbian rights organizations in the United States have mobilized confusing and at times contradictory rhetoric to solidify their moral high ground in the contentious battle over gay marriage. These organizations deploy both the effective rhetoric of an individual's right to love whomever they choose alongside more analytic rhetoric that demands full and equal access to a myriad of benefits and privileges administered by the state. By pulling on our heartstrings and appealing to the simple logic of equality, many have been duped into entering the short-sighted gay marriage debate when energy would be better focused elsewhere.
There it is. Right there. By pulling on our heartstrings and appealing to the simple logic of equality, many have been duped into entering the short-sighted gay marriage debate when energy would be better focused elsewhere. Queer Marxists, queer anarchists never wanted gay marriage. They were telling people this is an emotional appeal. You guys are telling us we want equality, but they don't want equality. They want equity. Equity and equality are not the same. They're telling us, they're saying, we have been duped into entering this short-sighted gay marriage debate when we could be doing better things that are going to be more conducive to bringing about the world we want. They didn't want the resources going to it. They didn't want the money going to it. They didn't want the activism energy going to it. They did not want gay marriage.
By pulling on our heartstrings and appealing to the simple logic of equality, many have been duped into entering the short-sighted gay marriage debate when energy would be better focused elsewhere. In 1911, Emma Goldman ripped marriage to shreds in her essay Marriage and Love by fiercely critiquing marriage's reinforcement of prescribed gender roles, patriarchy, and the nuclear family. She also wrote critically and extensively on the mobilization of a notion of love to justify the coercive state and church violence we call marriage. Here I will queerly continue where she left off, 100 years later. In 2009 I was helplessly kicking and screaming while the national campaigns for gay marriage descended on my mostly poor, mostly rural home state of Maine. Now, in the aftermath of the nauseatingly class-elitist failed campaign, gay and lesbian organizations, and the professional activists that prop them up, remain resiliently resistant to critically questioning what we, as queer and trans subjects, are seeking to be equal to in the first place. Do we really want full inclusion in the institution of marriage, a social contract that explicitly limits the ways in which we can organize our erotic and emotional lives?
Do we really want full inclusion in the institution of marriage, a social construct that explicitly limits the ways in which we can organize our erotic and emotional lives? Queer activists see marriage as a form of property relations. As a reminder, capitalism to the left means private property ownership. So if queer activists want to abolish capitalism, which they do, and queer activists see marriage as a form of propertied relationships because they believe it's an institution in which you become the property of your spouse, then they're not going to want that institution. They want to abolish that institution.
Furthermore, do we really want to reinforce a social institution where our immediate needs and access to collective benefits are contingent on this singular articulation of partnership?
So this is another aspect of this. So they're saying marriage is a social institution where our collective benefits, that means like health insurance and that sort of thing, are contingent on singular articulation of partnership. What that means is that queer activists, one of the reasons that queer activists or communists in general, honestly, one of the reasons they want to abolish the nuclear family is because they believe that the nuclear family is a form of privatizing access to care. So what that means is most people get insurance through their employer. When you get insurance through your employer, you are able to provide insurance for yourself and insurance for your family. So your family is insured based on one person's employment, and that is a private that's a form of private property because you are excluding the people who have access to that property. Does everyone understand that? Okay? So now they're saying this is a social institution where our immediate needs and access to collective benefits are contingent upon the singular articulation of partnership. Socialists and communists want universal health care. They want all health care to be free, available publicly on demand. That includes trans health care. That includes all psychiatric services and psychiatric drugs. That includes everything. That includes abortion. Abortion is a big one for them, obviously. That includes everything, okay? So if they believe that marriage as a social institution limits access to health care based on a private property relation, and they want universal health care, which is the opposite of limiting health care on a private to the private marriage, then they are fundamentally going to oppose the institution of marriage because they think it means that you are excluding people from access to the resources. Does everyone understand this? Please let me know. LG says, what do they mean by critical or critically? That's not a word you should be. Critical is just okay, so when they say critical, that is a reference to critical theory, which was developed by the Frankfurt School. When you hear critical, just think Marxism. It's a Marxist form of analysis. So that's a word that just in Marxism. They mean socialism. Leftist analysis. Patrick said the family does not necessarily share its benefit outside the family. Yes, that's exactly right. So if you have insurance based on the private family, that benefit is not shared outside the family. That's what they have a problem with because they believe in universal health care. They believe all health care should be available to everyone all the time. So the private nuclear family through marriage, whether that be gay marriage or straight marriage, it doesn't matter, that limits care, and therefore it is against their entire agenda.
Furthermore, do we really want to reinforce a social institution where our immediate needs and access to collective benefits are contingent on this singular articulation of partnership? Or have many of us allowed ourselves to be convinced by some vague notion of equality, with all its empty promises, that gay marriage is a battle worth fighting for? Mainstream gay and lesbian organizations position their campaign strategy and engrossing rhetoric around two competing discourses roughly examined here. By dissecting these competing discourses, one can see that marriage has little to do with love and that the mainstream gay and lesbian organizations' investments in winning the gay marriage battle further erode any possibility for a radically equitable queer future, a future that was once dared to be imagined by radical queer and trans folks organizing with ACT UP, Queer to the Left, and the George Jackson Brigade, and is still imagined today by radical grassroots organizations like Queers for Economic Justice, La Guy Queer, Insurrection, and Gay Shame, to name a few.
ACT UP. ACT UP was one of the first radical queer movements right there. That was in the 80s. Gay Shame is the organization that, or was that Queer Insurrection? That's Queer Insurrection, I think. Queer Insurrection was the organization that produced Queers Read This, which is one of the first like queer activist zines that got distributed at New York Pride, I think in 1990. I could be wrong about that date. But this is where they're alluding back to like, so ACT UP, we did a great episode of Socialism Saturday about the ACT UP movement. I highly recommend, if you're interested in the development of queer activism, you go back and watch that episode, because if they're mentioning ACT UP, we know that is a reference back to like really the first kind of militant queer direct action initiative, and it still exists today. Yeah, Queers for Economic Justice. We should look that up.
Discourses.
This one.
The first of these discourses is the highly effective and emotionally charged rhetoric of the individual's right to love whomever one chooses. The messaging that the gay marriage campaigns invoke here actively reinscribes the institution of marriage as one that is defined by and organized around a notion of love. With protest signs displaying slogans like, "Who else is fighting for love?" or "It's my right to love whomever I want," one is to believe that love is primarily what is at stake in the gay marriage debate. But as many historians have shown, marriage has never been centrally organized around love, but the buying and selling of women as property through a patriarchal dowry system that evolved into the soft coercion of domestic indentured servitude that Goldman so aptly dismantled in her writing. Although many of the more explicitly violent machinations of marriage have abetted in the United States, the structural and individual violence continues. Nearly half of all first marriages end in divorce. If marriage were the loving, providing, social safety net that those invoking family values rhetoric claim it is, then one is left wondering why the divorce rate is so remarkably high. Perhaps it is that nearly 7.8 million women have been raped by an intimate partner at some point in their lives, or that domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women between the ages of 15 and 44 in the United States. Or maybe it is that 68% of sexually abused children are victims of their own family members. Empiricism aside, the so-called healthy and privatized familial structures through which the institution of marriage seeks to minimize violence cannot be emulated if we, as a radical queer and trans community, are to confront the violence within our own community and families. In addition to the effective discourse outlined above, a more analytic approach is being deployed in tandem. This rhetoric relies on a certain brand of rugged American individualism that has spawned gay and lesbian organizations that invoke a rights-based discourse in their attempt at achieving what they contend is full equality. It is here we find numerous LGB and sometimes T activists in a rage over their 1,138 rights that federally recognized marriage will bring them, but are denied. These state benefits and privileges, as outlined in the Defense of Marriage Act, are overwhelmingly about the transfer of money and property. The almost exclusive emphasis.
Listen, look at this. They're like, all of these gay people are whining about all the ways that their lives will get better if marriage is just recognized, and these are all, and the ways that they list are all about money and property. What did I tell you earlier? The left views any marriage, gay or straight, as a form of property relations. And so the queer activists are saying to the non-queer gay people, because if the gay people are just screaming about marriage because they want insurance benefits, they are not queer. I need to emphasize this for anyone that's new. Queer is a far left political ideology. You do not have to be gay to be queer. You do not have to be trans to be queer. Just because you are gay does not mean you are queer. Just because you are trans does not mean you are queer. There is a big difference between a gay person who just wants to be able to get married and visit their loved one in the hospital should they ever need to, and a queer activist who wants to live a polyamorous, kinky lifestyle on a commune. These are different things. These are completely different political groups, okay? And these political groups do not get along. And so what they're saying is, marriage is just about property. Marriage is about the transfer of money. It's about property. We don't buy into that. So if you're a far left political ideology and you are fundamentally against any form of property relations, then the whole idea that we should legalize gay marriage based on primarily property relations is an absurd notion.
These state benefits and privileges, as outlined in the Defense of Marriage Act, are overwhelmingly about the transfer of money and property. The almost exclusive emphasis on property rights highlights that marriage has little to do with love, but with benefits and privileges, as doled out by the state to those who adhere to a specific set of moral values determined by the church.
So they're saying it again. They're saying marriage that is based on property relations, on inheritance, on insurance, on things like that, that's not about love. In some respects, it is kind of like a utopian vision that they have. They're saying, if you're going to be in a relationship with someone, you should actually be in love with them. And what they're saying is people who are in marriages are not necessarily in love with who they're married to. They're just doing it because it's a form of property relations. It gives them access to insurance. It gives them security and stuff like that. But they even said it earlier in this document. If marriage was about love, then why do so many marriages end in divorce? Now that's their opinion. That's not mine. I'm trying to articulate what they believe, but they're saying it again and again.
Gay marriage organizations are mobilizing this rights-based discourse focused on equal access to state benefits and privileges in tandem with highly effective love rhetoric to win over public opinion by appealing to socialized emotional responses while simultaneously making a more strategic analytic argument for gay marriage. This two-pronged approach has successfully dragged many LGBT activists into its blinding double discourse by effectively motivating the engagement of many queer and trans folks who would be better off putting their energy elsewhere.
Said that earlier.
What if we, as a queer and trans social justice movement, focused on achieving access to many of marriage's forbidden fruits for all people, not just citizen couples, gay, straight, or otherwise?
So now they're saying, again, the benefits of marriage are insurance and healthcare. So what if we, instead of focusing on this marriage issue, what if we instead focused on doing things that gave everyone healthcare? That means overthrowing capitalism.
Fortunately, this double discourse will fail miserably in the long term because it is impossible to claim marriage is an institution based on love when the only way to do so is to mimic the hyper-conservative family values rhetoric of the Christian right. The normalizing function of this claim, that loving families can only exist within the narrow confines of an immediate nuclear family structure, will continue to mark some families as worthy of survival and others as a deadly threat. As noted by gay historian John D'Amelio in his piece, "The Marriage Fight is Setting Us Back," greater acceptance of gay and lesbian people has largely come from straight people abandoning fantasy familial conservatism, opting for queerer, more non-traditional ways of organizing both their erotic lives and their families. The smiling white families posed in picturesque
Capitalist.
suburban backyards that appeared on pro-gay marriage campaign materials in Maine looked no different than the anti-gay marriage propaganda of smiling white families in picturesque suburban backyard. Not only did the visual narratives mimic one another, save the difference in gendered couples among neonuclear gay families, but the accompanying family values rhetoric was nearly identical. The fervent reinvestment in the nuclear family as a site of financial security, moral aptitude, and physical safety for the child should be horrifying to us all. This kind of logic around familial safety has been challenged by 3 decades of feminist critique that problematizes the nuclear family as the primary site of sexual violence against children and cannot be erased or obscured through this rhetorical appeal.
So now they're kind of saying, imagine believing that the nuclear family is a safe place to raise kids, because socialists want kids to be raised communally. They want kids to have multiple sets of parents. And one of the reasons they make that argument is the nuclear family is the place that kids are most likely to be abused. So why on earth would we have that be the structure in which we are raising children when most kids are going to get abused in their own family? Instead, we should be communizing the raising of children, which is to have many parents for the children, not just the biological parents, but many parents, because that will be safer for the children.
This neoliberal fantasy of the nuclear family as the only provider of emotional and economic safety is being recovered and deployed by the contemporary gay rights movement. In a bizarre twist in history, gays and lesbians are turning their backs on the kinds of radical new configurations of family that have liberated straight people. Neoliberalism, which I broadly define here as the concentrated privatization of every facet of our daily lives, depends upon this effective discourse, which asserts that the immediate family constitutes an unproblematized site of safety and security, while the rest of the world is rendered a dangerous outside. By insisting that the gay and lesbian nuclear family, a retrograde hetero mimicry throwback to the 1950s, needs protection, gay marriage activists are further enabling the privatization of social safety net.
Okay, we got to break down this sentence. This was great. I know it's across 2 pages. It's a little bit hard to see. By insisting that the gay and lesbian nuclear family, a retrograde hetero mimicry throwback to the 50s, needs protection, gay marriage activists are further enabling the privatization of social safety nets. So again, they're saying if you embrace gay marriage, you are preventing us from getting universal health care. You're preventing us from getting better care for children because you're doing this 1950s thing where you're pretending that the nuclear family is all that there is. That is the argument that they're making.
For example, the heightened emphasis on the idea that gay marriage is necessary for same-sex partners to gain health insurance allows the state to further justify not creating a system of universal health care where all people, regardless of marital status, receive necessary medical care.
I swear to God, I did not read ahead when I said that. I just know what this argument is because I've heard so much of this stuff. But I mean, could there be a better sentence? The heightened emphasis on the idea of gay marriage is necessary for same-sex partners to gain health insurance allows the state to further justify not creating a system of universal health care where all people, regardless of marital status, receive necessary medical care. So they're framing it again as this is just all about property relations, and that's why we're not in favor of it.
In the 1980s, queers agitated for universal health care in the face of a devastating AIDS epidemic.
That was ACT UP, by the way. They're referring to ACT UP in this.
In the 1980s, queers agitated for universal health care in the face of a devastating AIDS epidemic that left them caring for those whom the state refused to consider worthy of the most basic care. Today they are calling for the opposite by insisting that only those in state-mandated relationships are worthy of health care. The campaigns for gay marriage, and their accompanying confused rhetoric, have been neatly folded into a handful of other issues under the banner of equality across the United States. Equality rhetoric is short-sighted at best and positions our most fantastic queer futures as not only unattainable but also unreasonable. It demands that we put our time and energy into the desperate fight to be equal participants in oppressive and archaic institutions instead of attempting to actualize our dreams of queer utopia. Furthermore, equality rhetoric has created a vacuum of gay pragmatism in which our queer political imagination has withered away.
Let me go back to that because it's just kind of funny. They're literally saying, if we put energy into the fight for gay marriage, we will never achieve our queer utopia. So the queer utopia does not include marriage because marriage is a form of property relations. So utopia for queer activists would never include a form of property relations because the goal of queer Marxism is to abolish capitalism. So their queer utopia ain't going to have any capitalist institutions, and they believe that the institution of marriage is a fundamentally capitalist institution.
Furthermore, equality rhetoric has created a vacuum of gay pragmatism in which our queer political imagination has withered away, allowing no time or space to even imagine more just, more equitable ways of meeting our material and affective needs as a larger community. The question remains then, how do we, as radical queer and trans folks, push back against the emerging hegemony of rainbow-flavored neoliberalism and the funneling of our energy into narrow campaigns that only reinforce the hierarchical systems and institutions we fundamentally oppose? How do we reconcile the contradiction of our anger and fervent criticism of so-called equality when presently many of our material lives depend on accessing resources through the very subject of our critique? Although I do not have concrete solutions to offer, I believe we must create more space and time to have these vital conversations, be more open and public about our critique of marriage, build coalitions with others who stand little to gain from marriage, imagine other worlds together, and dream up new ways of meeting our material and affective needs. De-essentializing anarchist feminism.
Hang on. That's the end of the gay marriage article? Okay. So that article said exactly what I said it was going to say. I want everyone to learn from that. Does anyone have questions about the essay that we just read? About gay marriage and queer love? And I'm not going to repeat it again because I just beat the dead horse 15 times with they believe marriage is a form of property relations. They didn't want gay marriage. They believe that it's about insurance. They believe that it's counterproductive. They believe that spending time fighting for gay marriage, this was back in 2012, is not a good use of energy when they could be spending time overthrowing capitalism to provide healthcare for everyone. Does anyone have questions about the first essay? Okay. If you do, ask questions in the chat. Otherwise, we are moving on to the next essay in the book. This essay is called De-Essentializing Anarchist Feminism, Lessons from the Trans Feminist Movement. I have no idea what to expect with this essay. I haven't read it. This is not something I've investigated from them, so we'll see what they have to say.
De-essentializing Anarchist Feminism, Lessons from the Trans Feminist Movement. J. Rogue. Transfeminism developed out of a critique of the mainstream and radical feminist movement.
Oh, wait.
The feminist...
I do know what this is. Hang on. I do know what this is. LG says, what do they mean by problematic? Problematic means something they don't want. Something that gets in the way of them overthrowing capitalism. I do know what transfeminism is. And this comes from a socialist talk like 2 years ago that we watched. So let me see if I remember how to articulate this. Queer activists believe that this is essentially about third wave feminism, which second wave feminism was about like women are women, and second wave feminism, like the TERFs, they don't want to include trans women in their feminism, whereas third wave feminism wants it to be all about trans women and the fight for like trans replacing like the TERF feminism. I think that's what this is. Yeah, this is like this is actually a really good way to put it, Bot. It's transforming feminism to be about trans women. And if you remember, we watched something with not Jules, Joey, and Gleason, the other one. No, it was Jules, Joey, and Gleason. We watched an interview with Jules, Joey, and Gleason, who's the person that one of the people that edited the book Transgender Marxism. And basically, Jules, Joey, and Gleason said that the trans activism was supposed to replace traditional feminism. So I bet that's what this is about.
De-essentializing anarchist feminism, lessons from the trans feminist movement. J. Rogue. Transfeminism developed out of a critique of the mainstream and radical feminist movement. The feminist movement has a history of internal hierarchies. There are many examples of women of color, working-class women, lesbians, and others speaking out against the tendency of the white, affluent-dominated women's movement to silence them and overlook their need. But generally, instead of acknowledging the issues these marginalized voices raised, the mainstream feminist movement has prioritized struggling for rights primarily in the interests of white affluent women. While the feminist milieu as a whole has not resolved these hierarchical tendencies, various groups have continued to speak up regarding their own marginalization, in particular, transgender women. The process of developing a broader understanding of systems of oppression and how they interact has advanced feminism and is key to building on the theory of anarchist feminism.
Second wave.
But first, we might take a quick look at the development of feminism, particularly during what is often referred to as its second wave.
Hang on. I want to make sure people understand what this means. So AP says the white affluent category again. It is very important that people understand that when socialists and communists say the word white or whiteness or white supremacy, they do not mean white skin color. They mean the bourgeois. They mean the capitalist class. They mean the owner class. Affluent is a term for bourgeois. It's not about white skin color. Does anyone have questions about this? We watched a video for Socialism Saturday, I think, last week, maybe, where they explicitly said that white was a reference for people who didn't work in the sun. It's not about white skin. It's about being part of the ownership class. Okay, everyone's on board. Good. Yes, Mizakan says, so this trans feminism thing is about feminism that's more than just women. It's anti-capitalist feminism that's intersectional. This is what Sophie Lewis just wrote her book about. Sophie Lewis, for people who don't know, is our favorite Abolish the Family anarchist, but Sophie just wrote a book called Enemy Feminisms, which is basically about all of the different groups of women who consider themselves to be feminists, but they aren't anti-capitalist. So Sophie is like, these are enemy feminists because they're not anti-capitalist feminists.
Generally, the historical narratives of feminism that suggest that we might look at feminism in waves point to the second wave as a turbulent period with many competing visions. I'll use that perspective here, though I also realize that the narrative is problematic in a number of ways, particularly its Western and U.S. bias, and I want to acknowledge that. I'm from the United States, which is the context in which I organize and live. This particular narrative is useful here for noting some larger tendencies within feminism, particularly where I'm from, though again I want to acknowledge that this process, while descriptive, engages in some of the kinds of exclusions I am criticizing in this chapter. I also want to acknowledge that this is a story for drawing out some necessary and important divisions, but any categorization can be problematic. There have been theories of liberal, radical.
Any categorization can be problematic. Keep that in mind. Any categorization can be problematic.
There have been theories of liberal, radical, Marxist, and socialist feminism that do not fit this particular narrative. I want to stress, however, that I find it useful in describing theoretical pasts and presents in order to draw out a radically different feminist and anarchist future. During the late 60s through the early 80s, new forms of feminism began to emerge. Many feminists seem to gravitate to four competing theories with very different explanations for the oppression of women, and their theories had consequences for feminist practices of inclusion and exclusion. Like their historical predecessors of the first wave, who were mainly concerned with voting rights, liberal feminists saw no need for a revolutionary break with existing society. Rather, their focus was on breaking the glass ceiling, getting more women into positions of political and economic power. Liberal feminists assumed that the existing institutional arrangements were fundamentally unproblematic. Their task was to see to women's equality accommodated under capitalism.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was that? Their task was to see a woman's equality accommodated under capitalism. That's second wave feminism. So the queers want to transcend that feminism to make it anti-capitalist.
Their task was to see to women's equality accommodated under capitalism. Another theory, sometimes referred to as radical feminism, argued for abandoning the male left, as it was seen as hopelessly reductionist. Indeed, many women coming out of the civil rights and anti-war movements complained of pervasive sexism within the movements because they were relegated to secretarial tasks and experienced sexual pressure from male leaders as well as a generalized alienation from left politics. According to many radical feminists of the time, this was due to the primacy of the system of patriarchy, or men's systematic and institutionalized domination of women. To these feminists, the battle against patriarchy was the primary struggle to create a free society, as gender was our most entrenched and oldest hierarchy. This made a neatly defined sisterhood.
Gender was our most entrenched and oldest hierarchy. If you've been to previous episodes of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, you know what that means. If you need me to explain that, please let me know.
This made a neatly defined sisterhood important to their politic. Marxist feminists, on the other hand, tended to locate women's oppression within the economic sphere. The fight against capitalism was seen as the primary battle, as the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. Further, Marxist feminists tended to believe that the economic base of society had a determining effect on its cultural superstructures. Thus, the only way to achieve equality between women and men would be to smash capitalism, as new, egalitarian economic arrangements would give rise to new, egalitarian superstructures.
You don't say. The only way to achieve equality between women and men would be to smash capitalism, as new egalitarian economic arrangements would give rise to new egalitarian superstructures. So for those of you who watched the Denver Communists the other day talking about masculinity, do you guys remember when the Denver Communists were talking about how the economic base of Marxism is the foundation? The house built on top of the foundation is the superstructure of Marxism. That's because Marxism is both an economic and a cultural plan. Okay? It's not just about economics. It's also about culture. It's about the social relationships of people. The economic base of Marxism is about who controls the means of production. On top of that gets built a house that is the cultural output of that control. The cultural output means things like marriage, the nuclear family. It means things like gendered relations, what men and women are, the gender binary. Okay? So what socialists believe, and we've covered this in previous episodes, generally speaking, and it's the LG, I see you asking about this in the chat, so I'll explain. Socialists believe that capitalism, defined as private property ownership, created the gender binary. The gender binary means men and women. It put men in the workplace where they had access to all the power and all the money, women in the home where they did the unpaid labor of raising the next generation of proletarian workers in the nuclear family. Now, these are both socially constructed roles based on capitalism. So in this example, the foundation of the house is capitalism as private property ownership. The superstructure that gets built on top are the socially constructed roles of men and women, the gender binary. So what Marxists believe is if you get rid of capitalism, you get rid of the foundation of economic production, that in turn will change the social output of what the culture has. So if you get rid of capitalism, you get rid of men and women. Does everyone understand that? If you abolish capitalism, you abolish the socially constructed roles of men and women because those socially constructed roles were created by the foundation of capitalism. Yeah. So AP says, I just had a flashback to James Lindsay screaming that Marxism isn't economic but religious. Yeah, that was never true. That was never true. There is a very specific argument that they're making. I appreciate you bringing that up. Does everyone understand that? So when they're saying, and where did they say this? The only way to achieve equality between men and women would be to smash capitalism. They're saying the only way to get rid of the patriarchy, the gender hierarchy that capitalism created, the only way to get rid of that is to get rid of capitalism, because as long as you have capitalism, that will continue to reproduce the socially constructed roles of men and women. So if you want to get rid of the patriarchy, which is what that hierarchy is, you want all genders to be equal, you have to get rid of capitalism, which will get rid of the idea of men and women, and then you've got equity. The problem is you've got a world of non-binary they-thems at that point, because the only way to get rid of the gender binary is to make everyone non-binary. Non-binary means no binary. And all of a sudden, everyone's a they-them.
The fight against capitalism was seen as the primary battle, as the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. Further, Marxist feminists tended to believe that the economic base of society had a determining effect on its cultural superstructures. Thus, the only way to achieve equality between women and men would be to smash capitalism, as new, egalitarian economic arrangements would give rise to new, egalitarian superstructures. Such was the determining nature of the economic base. This argument was mapped out quite eloquently by Marx's companion, Engels. Out of the conversations between Marxist feminism and radical feminism, another approach emerged called dual systems theory. A product of what came to be dubbed socialist feminism, dual systems theory argued that feminists needed to develop a theoretical account which gives as much weight to the system of patriarchy as to the system of capitalism.
Okay, so the system of patriarchy is created by the system of capitalism because, again, patriarchy is the hierarchy, the gender hierarchy that capitalism created. So they are two separate things. Remember, they believe that capitalism is the foundation, whereas the patriarchy would be in the superstructure. So the patriarchy is the house built on top of the foundation, but the foundation is still there. So they are separate but interrelated things.
Out of the conversations between Marxist feminism and radical feminism, another approach emerged called dual systems theory. A product of what came to be dubbed socialist feminism, dual systems theory argued that feminists needed to develop a theoretical account which gives as much weight to the system of patriarchy as to the system of capitalism. While this approach did much to resolve some of the arguments about which fight should be primary, it still left much to be desired. For example, black feminists argued that this perspective left out a structural analysis of race. Further, where was oppression based on sexuality, ability, age, etc. in this analysis? Were all of these things reducible to capitalist patriarchy? And importantly, for this chapter, where were the experiences of trans folks, particularly trans women? Given this historical lack, feminism required a specifically trans feminism. Trans feminism builds on the work that came out of the multiracial feminist movement, and in particular, the work of black feminists. Frequently, when confronted with allegations of racism, classism, or homophobia, The women's movement dismisses these issues as divisive or SEC. Andri. The more prominent voices promoted the
Secondary.
idea of a homogeneous, universal female experience, which, as it is based on commonality between women,
Yeah.
theoretically promotes a sense of sisterhood. In reality, it means pruning the definition of woman and trying to fit all women into a mold reflecting the dominant demographic of the women's movement: white, affluent, heterosexual, and non-disabled.
Okay, so basically what they're saying is traditional feminism excludes all of the anti-capitalist women. So if you have traditional feminism in which you're excluding people from the category of woman, then you're excluding people who are not white, which means capitalist, not affluent, which also means capitalist, not heterosexual, which also means capitalist, and not disabled, which means able-bodied, which is the opposite of disability in Crip studies, which also means capitalist. These are four things that all mean the same thing, because and they don't mean exactly all the same thing. That's me being a smartass basically, but they're referring to different aspects of capitalism. Okay, so when I say all these different words mean capitalism, it's referring to different aspects of capitalism. And so it's not as though every single word, literally the dictionary definition, is capitalism, but it's all referencing back to the capitalist normative system in some way. And so it's important that people understand that because the goal is always and forever to abolish capitalism, they're just attacking it from multiple different angles. And that's all that means.
In reality, it means pruning the definition of woman and trying to fit all women into a mold reflecting the dominant demographic of the women's movement: white, affluent, heterosexual, and non-disabled. This policing of identity, whether conscious or not, reinforces systems of oppression and exploitation. When women who do not fit this mold have challenged it, they have frequently been accused of being divisive and disloyal to the sisterhood. The hierarchy of womanhood created by the women's movement reflects, in many ways, the dominant culture of racism, capitalism, and heteronormativity. Mirroring this history, mainstream feminist organizing frequently tries to find the common ground shared by women, and therefore focuses on what the most vocal members decide are women's issues, as if the female experience existed in a vacuum outside of other forms of oppression and exploitation. However, using an intersectional approach to analyzing and organizing around oppression, as advocated by multiracial feminism and transfeminism, we can discuss these differences rather than dismiss them. The multiracial feminist movement developed this approach, which argues that one cannot address the position of women without also addressing their class, race, sexuality, ability, and all other aspects of their identity and experiences.
That's intersectionality.
Forces of oppression and exploitation do not exist separately. They are intimately related and reinforce each other, and so trying to address them singly does not lead to a clear understanding of the patriarchal system. This is in accordance with the anarchist view that we must fight all forms of hierarchy.
So basically what it just said is, if you are not addressing the role of capitalism, then you do not have a clear understanding of the patriarchal system to begin with. Patrick, they've been talking about this the entire time. I really need to encourage you. Please resist the urge to dunk on the libs, because first of all, we're not listening to libs, we're listening to hardcore queer anarchists. Secondly, any dunk you have on the libs is not going to actually land here, I promise you. We more find it annoying than anything. Thirdly, if you have questions about what's being said, you need to put those questions in the chat, because they've been talking about intersectionality literally this entire time, and it seems like you just noticed, which is fine. It's okay to be late to the party, but if your choice is to dunk on the libs rather than to ask a question, that's not the most productive use of time.
This is in accordance with the anarchist view that we must fight all forms of hierarchy, oppression, and exploitation simultaneously. Abolishing capitalism and the state does not ensure that white supremacy and patriarchy will somehow magically disappear.
Oh, that's
Tied to
interesting.
this assumption of a universal female experience is the idea that if a woman surrounds herself with those that embody that universal woman, then she is safe from patriarchy and oppression. The concept of women's safe spaces, date back to the early lesbian feminist movement, which was largely comprised of white women who were more affluent and prioritized addressing sexism over other forms of oppression. This notion that an all-women space is inherently safe not only discounts the intimate violence that can occur between women, but also ignores or deprioritizes the other types of violence that women can experience: racism, poverty, incarceration, and other forms of state, economic, and social brutality.
They're talking about women's bathrooms, by the way. I'm pretty sure that's what that's what it sounds like it's referring to. Isn't it funny that we're literally still having the same debate about women's bathrooms? This was written 13 years ago. Still having the same debate today. Nothing has changed. And the reason nothing has changed, by the way, is that the right does not understand the left. And they think that they do, but they don't.
This notion that an all-women space is inherently safe not only discounts the intimate violence that can occur between women, but also ignores or deprioritizes the other types of violence that women can experience: racism, poverty, incarceration, and other forms of state, economic, and social brutality. Written after the work of, and influenced by, trans-feminist pioneers like Sandy Stone, Sylvia Rivera, and Rivera's Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, the Trans-Feminist Manifesto states, "Transfeminism believes that we construct our own gender identities based on what feels genuine, comfortable, and sincere to us as we live and relate to others within given social and cultural constraint." The notion that gender is a social construct is a key concept in transfeminism, and is—
Oh, I'm sorry. What is that? What is that? The notion that gender is a social construct is a key concept in transfeminism? That means that gender is a social construct created by capitalism. Like we've already talked about. I won't say it again.
Written after the work of, and influenced by, trans-feminist pioneers like Sandy Stone, Sylvia Rivera, and Rivera's Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, the Trans-Feminist Manifesto states, "Transfeminism believes that we construct our own gender identities based on what feels genuine, comfortable, and sincere to us as we live and relate to others within given social and cultural constraint." The notion that gender is a social construct is a key concept in transfeminism, and is also essential to an anarchist approach to feminism.
And by the way, Bot just did find the Transfeminist Manifesto, so I'll make sure to include a link to this in the show notes when I put the podcast on the Substack, so we can have that. We'll probably read it at some point. We've got a lot of stuff on the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club reading list that we need to do, so I will add that to the list.
Transfeminism also criticizes the idea of a universal female experience, and argues against the biologically essentialist view that one's gender is defined by one's genitalia. Other feminisms have embraced the—
So trans women are women. This is we found the origin point of trans women are women, guys. Congrats.
Other feminisms have embraced the essentialist argument, seeing the idea of women's unity as being built off a sameness, some kind of core womanness. This definition of woman is generally reliant on what is between a person's legs. Yet what specifically about the definition of woman is intrinsic to two X chromosomes? If it is defined as being in possession of a womb, does that mean women who have had hysterectomies are somehow less of a woman? Reducing gender to biology relegates the definition of woman to the role of childbearer.
I want people to really understand this, because it is important that people understand the origin of these ideas, because these ideas show up again in the real world. The arguments, this document was written in 2012. When was this Transfeminism Manifesto written? Let me just get it up on my screen. 2001. I was still in college when the Transfeminist Manifesto was written. 2001. I would be willing to bet that some people listening to this weren't even born in 2001, or they were very, 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 very young. So the reason I bring that up is it is important to know the origin of these ideas. Okay, Patrick says, I'm trying to follow along, but I feel like my brain is trying to melt out my ears. Patrick, everyone has been in the situation that you're in. Every single person who's ever learned this stuff has been there, bro. The best thing you can do, and I'm trying to help you learn this, I really am. You need to take some deep breaths and you need to ask questions, okay? And I know sometimes it's hard to know what question you need to ask. I really do get it, especially when you're new to this and you're maybe not sure of what you're listening to. But if you ask in the chat, we can help you understand it and break it down, because this is a lot. The point I want to make is this. The ideas in this document, I have heard these ideas again over and over. In college lectures, we see these ideas articulated on leftists on Twitter. I've seen this in K through 12 education. We've seen this obviously in any training around gender diversity or genderqueer or stuff like that. This started on the far left fringe, but it trickled down into culture. And so the ideas in these documents show up in the real world. And so it is very important that we understand the origin of these ideas, where these ideas come from, what these ideas mean, because oftentimes when it trickles into the world, that information gets lost. And the socialist left wants that information to get lost, by the way. Because the more that information gets lost, the easier it is to actually recruit and radicalize people, because the people who are learning this stuff think, I just want to be a good person. I just want to treat everyone fairly. I want women to be treated the same as men. That's what they think. They think that this is about equality. When you actually read the documents, you find out this is not about equality at all. This is about equity. But when it trickles down into culture, people go along with it because they're like, of course I want men and women to be treated the same. Of course I want trans people to have equal opportunity, because they're doing it to try to be a good person. They don't realize the radical agenda that they're buying into when they get involved in this stuff. And so that's why we need to be able to understand and explain, no, these ideas come from somewhere and it's not a place you're going to like.
Reducing gender to biology relegates the definition of woman to the role of childbearer.
I've literally heard
that
this in the
seems
college
rather
debate before.
antithetical to feminism. Gender roles have long been under scrutiny in radical communities. The idea that women are born to be mothers, are more sensitive and peaceful, are predisposed to wearing the color pink, and all the other stereotypes out there are socially constructed, not biological. If the gender role does not define what a woman is, and if a doctor marking F on a birth certificate do not define gender either, the next logical step is to recognize that gender can only be defined by the individuals for themselves, or perhaps we need as many genders as there are people, or even further, that gender should be abolished.
You remember how I said earlier that they believe that if capitalism is abolished, gender is going to be abolished? Abolishing gender is one of the primary goals of queer Marxism. We've talked about this extensively in past episodes, and they literally just said it again. The next logical step is to recognize that gender can only be defined by the individuals themselves. Or perhaps we need as many genders as there are people, or even further, that gender should be abolished. The far left was talking about these ideas of genderqueer, gender non-binary, there being a gender spectrum. They were talking about these ideas in their subcultures decades before conservatives had any idea what was going on. If you want to know, people ask me all the time, they're like, Karlyn, what can we do to fight back against the left? And I always say to them, you need to learn as much as you can about the left. And that is always a dissatisfying answer because they want something to do. People don't realize that sitting your ass down and learning what they believe and looking at what they've done, That is something to do. And the reason the left is so far ahead today, the reason you have genderqueer stuff, you have non-binary trans kids, you have kids lobbing off body parts, you have all these things. The reason you have all these things is because you didn't listen to them 20 years ago. Had you learned as much as you could 20 years ago, when they first started talking about all this crazy stuff, perhaps many things could have been cut off at the pass. Perhaps these problems could have been mitigated before they got integrated into every public school in the country. But the reason they weren't is because the right refused to listen. And so there is no way to go back and unring this bell. There's no way. There is no way that a Trump executive order is going to fix this problem. Because now this problem is a cultural problem. You don't fix a cultural problem by signing an executive order. Now, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of the executive orders that Trump has signed are fundamentally good. I think they're helpful. I think they throw sand in the gear of the left. And so I'm not necessarily opposed to them. But what I am opposed to is people being under the impression that Trump has just saved everyone from genderqueer insanity, because he has not. Genderqueer insanity got cultivated in the United States in the 70s and the 80s primarily. It really started in the 60s, kind of started bubbling up in far-left punk music scenes in like the 70s. The 80s is when this stuff really started getting organized. Who was president in the 80s? Ronald Reagan and then George W. Bush. And I bring this up specifically because if you think a Republican president is going to stop this, this got started under Republican presidents. This grew stronger under Republican presidents. Being the opposition has always made these people more powerful. And so now fast forward to 2025, and people think Trump is going to save us. The executive orders have stopped everything. Oh, no, no, no. Queer activism wasn't even really a thing for the last couple years. We have barely seen any queer activism since October 7th of 2023 because the far left switched over to the Free Palestine thing. And then Trump came into office and he signed these executive orders. And now we are seeing a resurgence in queer activism, which is exactly what I said was going to happen. Now, that's not a reason. Now, I'm not suggesting Trump shouldn't have done, excuse me. I'm not suggesting Trump shouldn't have done the executive orders. I'm not suggesting that. But I am suggesting there's a consequence to that. And I'm suggesting that these people love being the opposition to the evil, tyrannical Republicans. They gain more power. They recruit and radicalize more people. They create more activists when they are in the opposition. So if you want to learn how to fight back against the left, you need to start taking it seriously. That is what needs to happen. You need to start taking it seriously. And the first step to taking it seriously is to learn as much as you can. Even when it's hard, even when you don't want to do it, even when it doesn't follow your favorite talking points, you have to learn what is going on. Because I promise you, had the right actually understood this 20 fucking years ago, we would be in a completely different world today. Everything would be different today had the right taken the time to listen and understand. They didn't. And here we are.
If the gender role does not define what a woman is, and if a doctor marking F on a birth certificate do not define gender either, the next logical step is to recognize that gender can only be defined by the individuals for themselves, or perhaps we need as many genders as there are people, or even further, that gender should be abolished. While these ideas may cause some to panic, that does not make them any less legitimate with regard to people's identities, or experiences, or the kinds of difficult political projects we might have ahead of us.
Hang on, we got a question from Time in the chat, and I haven't seen Time before, so welcome if you're new. Our local LGBTQ pride group is now hosting get-togethers called Queer and Out. I wonder if they flipped or they were undercover. Okay, again, queer and trans are not the same thing. Queer and gay are not the same thing. If an organization is calling itself queer, chances are it's more about a far left political ideology than it is about being gay or trans. Now, I don't know your group specifically, but I wouldn't say that they flipped. I would say that they utilized an approach. Well, okay, so here's the thing. Queer activists fundamentally believe that gay and trans people should be on their side. Not all gay and trans people are on their side. Just because you're gay doesn't mean you're queer. Just because you're trans doesn't mean you're queer. But queer activists fundamentally believe that all gay and trans people should be on their side, because why wouldn't you be? You're the oppressed class in their system. And so they do set up these scenarios where they try to kind of like recruit, like, don't you believe you're oppressed? Don't you want to? So it is an easy space for them to radicalize people. But I wouldn't say they flipped. I would say that they were always like that, because it's always been like this. And again, this is not new, guys. It's not new. Anyone who thinks this just popped up out of nowhere, this has been cultivated for decades, right under everyone's noses. They were doing it in public. They were posting everything in public. And conservative influencers and conservative media and conservative journalists, they failed their entire audience. They failed their entire side by not actually looking into this. That's who people should really be pissed at. Be pissed off at the people who put themselves in a position to try to tell you what was what, and then they didn't do basic research to find out what they were talking about.
While these ideas may cause some to panic, that does not make them any less legitimate with regard to people's identities, or experiences, or the kinds of difficult political projects we might have ahead of us. Trying to simplify complex issues, or fighting to maintain a hold on how gender was taught to us, does not help us understand patriarchy and how it functions. Instead, it does revolutionary feminisms a disservice. Having encountered a lack of understanding of trans issues in radical circles, I feel it important to note that not all transgender people choose to physically transition, and that each person's decision to do so or not is their own. The decision is highly personal and generally irrelevant to theoretical conceptions of gender.
So here's the origin of this idea. Everyone has heard this, right? How dare you question if I've had my balls cut off? I don't need to have surgery to be trans. You don't need to medically change yourself to be trans. We've all heard this. This has shown up in culture. Having encountered a lack of understanding of trans issues in radical circles, I feel it's important to note that not all transgender people choose to physically transition, and that each person's decision is their own. The decision is highly personal and generally irrelevant to theoretical conceptions of gender. Theoretical conceptions of gender means gender is a social construct created by capitalism. Men and women are social constructs created by capitalism. That is the theoretical conception of gender. They're saying the theoretical conception of gender is completely separate from whether or not people choose to have trans surgery. These are not related issues, okay? And the reason is not all trans people are queer, and you don't have to be trans to be queer, because being queer is a far left political ideology, and being trans is something that you do separately.
The decision is highly personal and generally irrelevant to theoretical conceptions of gender. There are many reasons to physically change one's body, from getting a haircut to taking hormones. One reason might be to feel more at ease in a world with strict definitions of male and female. Another is to look in the mirror and see on the outside the gender one feels on the inside. Surely, for some, it is the belief that gender is defined by the physical construction of one's genitalia. Too often, however, radicals who are unfamiliar with trans politics and ideas react strongly to individuals' choices with regard to their bodies, rather missing the point altogether. But rather than draw from speculation as to the motivations for the personal decisions of trans people, it is more productive to note the challenge to the idea that biology is destiny. Surely everyone would benefit from breaking down the binary gender system and deconstructing gender roles. That is the work of revolutionaries, not fretting over what other people should or shouldn't do to their bodies. Thus far, gender and feminist theory that includes trans experiences exists almost solely in academia. There are very few working-class intellectuals in the field, and the academic language used is not particularly accessible to the average person. This is unfortunate, since the issues that transfeminism addresses affect all people. Capitalism, racism, the state, patriarchy, and the medical field mediate the way everyone experiences gender.
So the reason that transfeminism affects all people is because transfeminism is fundamentally about the abolition of capitalism.
There is a significant amount of coercion employed by these institutions to police human experiences, which applies to everyone, trans and non-trans alike. Capitalism and the state play a very direct role in the experiences of trans people. Access to hormones and surgery, if desired, cost a significant amount of money, and people are often forced to jump through bureaucratic hoops in order to acquire them. Trans people are disproportionately likely to be poor. However, within the radical queer and trans feminist communities, while there may be discussions of class, they are generally framed around identity, arguing for anti-classist politics, but not necessarily anti-capitalist. The concepts espoused by transfeminism help us understand gender, but there is a need for the theory to break out of academia and to develop praxis among the working class and social movements generally. This is not to say that there are no examples of transfeminist organizing, but rather that there needs to be an incorporation of transfeminist principles into broad-based movement. Even gay and lesbian movements have a history of leaving trans people behind. For example, the fight for the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which does not protect gender identity. Again, we saw a hierarchy of importance. The mainstream gay and lesbian movement often compromises, rather than employing an inclusive strategy for liberation. There is frequently a sense of a scarcity of liberation within reformist social movements, the feeling that the possibilities for freedom are so limited that we must fight against other marginalized groups for a piece of the pie. This is in direct opposition to the concept of intersectionality, since it often requires people to betray one aspect of their identity in order to politically prioritize another. How can a person be expected to engage in a fight against gender oppression if it ignores or contributes to their racial oppression? Where does one aspect of their identity and experiences end and another begin? Anarchism offers a possible society in which liberation is anything but scarce. It provides a theoretical framework that calls for an end to all hierarchies.
As a reminder for people who may have missed the first part of this, they were explicit in the introduction of this book that when they say anarchism, they mean anarcho-communism. They don't mean, well, they didn't say that, but that's what they said without saying it. There is another form of anarchism called anarcho-capitalism, which does honor private property. They're not talking about anarcho-capitalism. So not all anarchism is created equal, and it's important to acknowledge that. They are talking about anarcho-communism every single time they say anarchism in this document.
It provides a theoretical framework that calls for an end to all hierarchies, and, as Martha Acklesberg suggests...
Well, I mean, maybe you guys should ask Michael Malice if he's aware of this, because I've every once in a while sent Michael Malice, things, and he's never responded. So, I like Michael Malice a lot, but I sent Michael Malice my Communist Manifesto fairy tale book the other day. Hasn't responded. I would actually love to talk to him. I would fucking love for Michael Malice to read the Communist Manifesto fairy tale that I wrote, because I actually think he'd like it. But I would love to talk to Michael Malice about this stuff. But if Michael Malice doesn't want to respond to me because of the friends he has, or the friends that I have, or any of these other things, I can't control that. So maybe you guys should tell him. Like, I don't know what to say, man. I would talk to him about this. I'd show him all this stuff.
It provides a theoretical framework that calls for an end to all hierarchies, and, as Martha Acklesberg suggests, it offers a perspective on the nature and process of social revolutionary transformation that can be extremely valuable for women's emancipation. Anarchists need to be developing working-class theory that includes an awareness of the diversity of the working class. The anarchist movement can benefit from the development of a working-class, anarchist approach to gender issues that incorporates the lessons of transfeminism and intersectionality. It is not so much a matter of asking anarchists to become active in the transfeminist movement as it is a need for anarchists to take a page from the Mujeres Libres and integrate the principles of feminism into our organizing within the working class and social movement. Continuing to develop contemporary anarchist theory of gender rooted in the working class requires a real and integrated understanding of transfeminism. Police at the Borders.
Oh, wait.
Volcano.
No. I'm not ready to do the police essay yet. We'll do the police essay next time. Do you guys want to read the Transfeminism Manifesto? Should we do like a bonus episode? Because I feel like the police thing is just completely separate. Should we do like a bonus episode now and maybe make this a little bit longer? One in the chat if you would like to read the Transfeminist Manifesto that Bot found earlier. 2 in the chat if you're done for the day and we should wrap it up. Let me know. Let me get the Transfeminism Manifesto downloaded just in case. Okay. Okay, hang on. Okay, looks like the ones have it, so we will read the Transfeminism Manifesto. I just need to upload it. No, that's not what I need to do. That's not what I wanted. Okay. Okay, so this is the Transfeminist Manifesto that was mentioned in that document. Bot was kind enough to find us a PDF, and I have uploaded it to our handy-dandy AI reader system. So this was written in July 26, 2001. So let's read.
The Transfeminist Manifesto by Emi Koyama, last edited on July 26, 2001. Introduction. The latter half of the 20th century witnessed an unprecedented broadening of American feminist movement as a result of the participation of diverse groups of women. When a group of women who had previously been marginalized within the mainstream of the feminist movement broke their silence, demanding their rightful place within it, they were first accused of fragmenting feminism with trivial matters, and then were eventually accepted and welcomed as a valuable part of the feminist thought. We have become increasingly aware that the diversity is our strength, not weakness. No temporary fragmentation or polarization is too severe to nullify the ultimate virtues of inclusive coalition politics. Every time a group of women previously silenced begins to speak out, other feminists are challenged to rethink their idea of whom they represent and what they stand for. While this process sometimes leads to a painful realization of our own biases and internalized oppressions as feminists, it eventually benefits the movement by widening our perspectives and constituency. It is under this understanding that we declare that the time has come for trans women to openly take part in the feminist revolution, further expanding the scope of the movement. Trans is often used as an inclusive term encompassing a wide range of gender norm violations that involve some discontinuity between one's sex assigned at birth to her or his gender identity and/or expression. For the purpose of this manifesto, however, the phrase trans women is at times used to refer to those individuals who identify, present or live more or less as women despite their birth sex assignment to the contrary. Trans men, likewise, is used to describe those who identify, present, or live as men despite the fact that they were perceived otherwise at birth. While this operational definition leaves out many trans people who do not conform to the male-female dichotomy
Hang
or
on,
those...
hang on. I need to read that again. Trans is often an inclusive term encompassing a wide range of gender norm violations that involves some discontinuity between one's assigned sex at birth and their gender identity. For the purpose of this manifesto, the phrase trans women is at times used to refer to these individuals who identify, present, or live more or less as women despite their birth sex assignment to the contrary. So this document may be the origin of trans women are women.
For the purpose of this manifesto, however, the phrase trans women is at times used to refer to those individuals who identify, present or live more or less as women despite their birth sex assignment to the contrary.
Patrick asks, does the phrase sex assigned at birth really go back as far as 2001? Well, let's ask ChatGPT right now. When was the phrase... I'm betting it's older than that, Patrick, honestly. When was the phrase sex assigned at birth first used? Let's see if ChatGPT knows the answer to this. I'm doing this on my phone. Let's see. I just told you guys like half an hour ago, maybe not even that long ago. Queer activism started in the 60s. The earliest that I can find queer as an anti-capitalist term was in 1964. However, there wasn't a ton of queer activism in the 60s as queer meaning an anti-capitalist ideology because it was brand new. Okay, so we really started to see more evidence of queer culture in these underground subcultures in the 70s and then exploded it in the 80s. Patrick just asked, does sex assigned at birth go back to 2001? Oh no, Patrick. Oh no, it doesn't. Sex assigned at birth has its origins in medical literature from the early 60s. A 1960 article in the Journal of Urology used the term assignment of sex at birth to describe the process by which physicians designate an infant's sex based on external genitalia. Guys, I know I say this every day now, but please start using AI. AI is so helpful. It's not perfect, but it's so helpful. The terminology evolved over time, and by the 1990s, it was adopted by transgender rights advocates to emphasize that sex classification at birth is a designation made by others rather than an inherent or immutable truth. This shift aimed to challenge the concept of biological sex as a fixed category and to highlight experiences of individuals whose gender identity does not align with their assigned sex at birth. And it's funny, isn't it? It's funny how when you look at the this is why timelines are so helpful. When you look at the timeline of all this stuff, it all aligns. 60s, started in the 60s, kind of started growing these subcultures in the 70s, exploded in the 80s under Reagan and W. Bush, really got much more militant in the 90s and the 2000s, and that is where we are today. Yeah, actually, this is on the list of many books I need to write, Dragon Balls. I actually have a Queer Marxism book that I'm working on explicitly for this thing. But you're right. I do actually want to do also a brief history book, but I want to write the queer Marxism book first, and then I want to distill that down into a queer history book. So there is a method to my madness, but this is, I want to do a whole series of a brief history of intersectionality, a brief history of disability studies, a brief history of fat studies. I want to do a whole series, and then I'm going to make a box set so people can buy all of them. That is the plan.
For the purpose of this manifesto, however, the phrase trans women is at times used to refer to those individuals who identify, present or live more or less as women despite their birth sex assignment to the contrary. Trans men, likewise, is used to describe those who identify, present, or live as men despite the fact that they were perceived otherwise at birth. While this operational definition leaves out many trans people who do not conform to the male-female dichotomy or those who are transgendered in other ways, it is our hope that they will recognize enough similarities between issues that we all face and find our analysis somewhat useful in their own struggles as well. Transfeminism is primarily a movement by and for trans women who view their liberation to be intrinsically linked to the liberation of all women and beyond. It is also open to other queers, intersex people, trans men, non-trans women, non-trans men and others who are sympathetic toward needs of trans women and consider their alliance with trans women to be essential for their own liberation. Historically, trans men have made greater contribution to feminism than trans women. We believe that it is imperative that more trans women start participating in the feminist movement alongside others for our liberation. Transfeminism is not about taking over existing feminist institutions. Instead, it extends and advances feminism as a whole through our own liberation and coalition work with all others. It stands up for trans and non-trans women alike, and asks non-trans women to stand up for trans women in return.
Annie asks, is the paperwork book, you mean the paperback book in the link? I am thinking about doing a hardcover version of the Communist Manifesto fairy tale that's illustrated and a little bit nicer. But it's not coming anytime soon. I've got other stuff I need to do. I do want to do it at some point, but buy the paperback version. The paperback version is awesome. It has little illustrations in it, but I do want to do a nicer hardcover one at some point.
Transfeminism embodies feminist coalition politics in which women from different backgrounds stand up for each other, because if we do not stand for each other, nobody will. Primary principles. Primary principles of transfeminism are simple. First, it is our belief that each individual has the right to define her or his own identities and to expect society to respect them. This also includes the right to express our gender without fear of discrimination or violence. Second, we hold that we have the sole right to make decisions regarding our own bodies, and that no political, medical or religious authority shall violate the integrity of our bodies against our will or impede our decisions regarding what we do with them. However, no one is completely free from the existing social and cultural dynamics of the institutionalized gender system. When we make any decisions regarding our gender identity or expression, we cannot escape the fact that we do so in the context of the patriarchal binary gender system. Trans women in particular are encouraged and sometimes required to adopt the traditional definition of femininity in order to be accepted and legitimatized by the medical community, which has appointed itself as the arbiter of who is genuinely woman enough and who is not.
So what they're doing is they're complaining about if you want to be a trans woman, you have to actually appear feminine. And they're saying the medical community created these socially constructed standards to decide who was a trans woman and who was not.
Trans women often find themselves having to prove their womanhood by internalizing gender stereotypes in order to be acknowledged as women or to receive hormonal and surgical interventions. This practice is oppressive to trans and non-trans women alike, as it denies uniqueness of each woman. Transfeminism holds that nobody shall be coerced into or out of personal decisions regarding her or his gender identity or expression in order to be a real woman or a real man. We also believe that nobody should be coerced into or out of these personal decisions in order to qualify as a real feminist. As trans women, we have learned that our safety is often dependent on how well we can pass as normal women. As trans feminists, we find ourselves constantly having to negotiate our need for safety and comfort against our feminist principles. Transfeminism challenges all women, including trans women, to examine how we all internalize heterosexist and patriarchal mandates of genders and what global implications our actions entail. At the same time, we make it clear that it is not the responsibility of a feminist to rid herself of every resemblance to the patriarchal definition of femininity. Women should not be accused of reinforcing gender stereotypes for making personal decisions, even if these decisions appear to comply with certain gender roles. Such a purity test is disempowering to women because it denies our agency, and it will only alienate a majority of women, trans or not, from taking part in the feminist movement. Transfeminism believes in the notion that there are as many ways of being a woman as there are women, that we should be free to make our own decisions without guilt.
And by the way, guys, this is also why if you say to them, "What is a woman?" the left doesn't care about that question. First of all, the left wants to abolish the whole category of women. They want to abolish the whole category of men. So when conservatives try to own the left by saying, "What is a woman?" the left is like, there's no definition of a woman because they're who are we to impose our definition of a woman? They believe the definition of a woman is socially constructed based on capitalism. Okay? Patrick said, but didn't gender roles and concepts of women predate capitalism? No. Not in this ideology, Patrick. And if you, and again, listen, I know you're going through a lot right now. You're processing a lot of information. If you go back and you listen to the Against the Gender Nightmare episodes of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, you will find that they believe capitalism started in ancient Sumeria and that capitalism created gender in ancient Sumeria. And so, no, in their ideology, capitalism did not, the concept of women did not predate, excuse me, the concept of women did not predate the advent of capitalism. And furthermore, also oh my gosh, what is going on? I'm talking too much today is the problem. Furthermore, they believe that even if the concept of gender predated the concept of capitalism, that capitalism is such a powerful force that once capitalism is introduced into a society, it takes over everything that predated it. Okay? So even if they didn't believe that capitalism started in ancient Sumeria, they would still believe that capitalism created the socially constructed role of men and women.
Transfeminism believes in the notion that there are as many ways of being a woman as there are women, that we should be free to make our own decisions without guilt. To this end, transfeminism confronts social and political institutions that inhibit or narrow our individual choices, while refusing to blame individual women for making whatever personal decisions. It is unnecessary, in fact oppressive, to require women to abandon their freedom to make personal choices to be considered a true feminist, for it will only replace the rigid patriarchal construct of ideal femininity with a slightly modified feminist version that is just as rigid. Transfeminism believes in fostering an environment where women's individual choices are honored, while scrutinizing and challenging institutions that limit the range of choices available to them. The question of male privilege. Some feminists, particularly radical lesbian feminists, have accused trans women and men of benefiting from male privilege. Male-to-female transsexuals, they argue, are socialized as boys and thus given male privilege. Female-to-male transsexuals, on the other hand, are characterized as traitors who have abandoned their sisters in a pathetic attempt to acquire male privilege. Transfeminism must respond to this criticism, because it has been used to justify discrimination against trans women and men within some feminist circles. When confronted with such an argument, a natural initial response of trans women is to deny ever having any male privilege whatsoever in their lives.
Here we go.
It is easy to see how they would come to believe that being born male was more of a burden than a privilege. Many of them despised having male bodies and being treated as boys as they grew up. They recall how uncomfortable it felt to be pressured to act tough and manly. Many have experienced bullying and ridicule by other boys because they did not act appropriately as boys. They were made to feel ashamed and frequently suffered from depression. Even as adults, they live with the constant fear of exposure, which would jeopardize their employment, family relationships, friendships, and safety. However, as trans feminists, we must resist such a simplistic reaction. While it is true that male privilege affects some men far more than others, it is hard to imagine that trans women born as males never benefited from it. Most trans women have passed as men at least some point in their lives, and were thus given preferable treatments in education and employment, for example, whether or not they enjoyed being perceived as men. They have been trained to be assertive and confident, and some trans women manage to maintain these masculine traits, often to their advantage, after transitioning. What is happening here is that we often confuse the oppression we have experienced for being gender deviant with the absence of the male privilege. Instead of claiming that we have never benefited from male supremacy, we need to assert that our experiences represent a dynamic interaction between male privilege and the disadvantage of being trans. Any person who has a gender identity and/or an inclination toward a gender expression that match the sex attributed to her or him has a privilege of being non-trans. This privilege, like other privilege...
hang on. It's important that we unpack this. Any person who has a gender identity and/or an inclination towards a gender expression that matches the sex attributed to him or her has a privilege of being non-trans. I wrote an article just the other day. Someone asked me, how can a person be trans and non-binary at the same time? And so I wrote an article on the Substack. You can find it right now, Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com, answering that question explicitly. But think about what this article that was written in 2001 just said. Any person who has a gender identity and an inclination towards a gender expression that matches the sex attributed to her or him has a privilege of being non-trans. What that means is, by inference, if you have a gender identity or are inclined towards a gender expression that does not match the sex attributed to him or her, you do not have the privilege of being non-trans. What that means insofar as the question of how can someone be both trans and non-binary at the same time? Non-binary, under this definition, is considered to be trans because non-binary means that your gender expression does not match the sex you were assigned at birth. Does everyone understand this? Trans does not mean transition in this ideology. It means transcend or transform. So if the definition of trans is someone has a gender expression, which is the clothes you wear, how you present to the world, someone has a gender expression that does not align with the traditionally what they believe are socially constructed concepts of men and women. If you don't dress like a girly girl or a masculine man, and instead you wear all sorts of crazy clothes and queer your haircut and do some sort of androgynous thing, you are, by their definition, trans because you are not conforming to the socially constructed gender identity you were assigned at birth. Let me know if you have questions.
Any person who has a gender identity and or an inclination toward a gender expression that match the sex attributed to her or him has a privilege of being non-trans. This privilege, like other privileges, is invisible to those who possess it. And like all other privileges, those who lack the privilege intuitively know how severely they suffer due to its absence. A trans woman may have limited access to male privilege depending on how early she transitioned and how fully she lives as a woman, but at the same time she experiences vast emotional, social, and financial disadvantages for being trans. The suggestion that trans women are inherently more privileged than other women is as ignorant as claiming that gay male couples are more privileged than heterosexual couples because both partners have male privilege. Tensions often arise when trans women attempt to access women's spaces
Bathrooms.
that are supposedly designed to be safe havens from the patriarchy.
Bathrooms.
The origin of these women's spaces can be traced back to the early lesbian feminism of the 1970s, which consisted mostly of white middle-class women who prioritized sexism as the most fundamental social inequality while largely disregarding their own role in perpetuating other oppressions such as racism and classism. Under the assumption that sexism marked women's lives far more significantly than any other social elements, they assumed that their experience of sexism is universal to all women regardless of ethnicity, class, etc., meaning all non-trans women.
Okay, so what they're saying is that the TERFs do not engage in intersectionality, so they assume that all women are the same, whereas the third wave feminists do engage in intersectionality, and that's why trans women are women.
Under the assumption that sexism marked women's lives far more significantly than any other social elements, they assumed that their experience of sexism is universal to all women regardless of ethnicity, class, etc., meaning all non-trans women. Recent critiques of the 1970s radical feminism point out how their convenient negligence of racism and classism in effect privileged themselves as white middle-class women. Based on this understanding, trans feminists should not respond to the accusation of male privilege with denial. We should have the courage to acknowledge ways in which trans women may have benefited from male privilege, some more than others, obviously, just like those of us who are white should address white privilege. Transfeminism believes in the importance of honoring our differences as well as similarities because women come from variety of background. Transfeminists confront our own privileges and expect non-trans women to acknowledge their privilege of being non-trans as well. By acknowledging and addressing our privileges, trans women can hope to build alliances with other groups of women who have traditionally been neglected and deemed unladylike by white middle-class standard of womanhood. When we are called deviant and attacked just for being ourselves, there is nothing to gain from avoiding the question of privilege. Deconstructing the reverse essentialism. While the second wave of feminism popularized the idea that one's gender is distinct from her—
Hang on. AP has a question in the chat. Are the queer Marxists pushing TERF women away? Oh yeah, queer Marxists do not want TERFs. Queer Marxists do not want to align with TERFs. They do not consider TERFs their friend. They do not want anything to do with them. They actively denounce them. So yeah, there is no second wave feminism in queer Marxism. This was 24 years ago. And they're saying exactly the same things they're saying today. And no one picked up on it because they weren't paying attention.
While the second wave of feminism popularized the idea that one's gender is distinct from her or his physiological sex and is socially and culturally constructed, it largely left unquestioned the belief that there was such a thing as true physical sex. The separation of gender from sex was a powerful rhetoric used to break down compulsory gender roles, but allowed feminists to question only half of the problem, leaving the naturalness of essential female and male sexes until recently. Transfeminism holds that sex and gender are both socially constructed, Furthermore, the distinction between sex and gender is artificially drawn as a matter of convenience.
Oh, yo, check this out. Check this out. Transfeminism holds that sex and gender are both socially constructed. So what that means is biological sex isn't real. We already knew that they don't believe gender is a real thing. They believe gender was created by capitalism. Now they're saying biological sex is also created by something. They haven't expressed what yet, but they're saying these are both socially constructed categories, and the distinction between gender and sex is artificially drawn as a matter of convenience.
Transfeminism holds that sex and gender are both socially constructed. Furthermore, the distinction between sex and gender is artificially drawn as a matter of convenience. While the concept of gender as a social construct has proven to be a powerful tool in dismantling traditional attitudes toward women's capabilities, it left room for one to justify certain discriminatory policies or structures as having a biological basis. It also failed to address the realities of trans experiences in which physical sex is felt more artificial and changeable than their inner sense of who they are. Social construction of biological sex is more than an abstract observation. It is a physical reality that many intersex people go through. Because society
because intersex people, that's why biological sex is socially constructed to the queer Marxists, because intersex people, of course.
Because society makes no provision for the existence of people whose anatomical characteristics do not neatly fit into male or female. They are routinely mutilated by medical professionals and manipulated into living as their assigned sex.
And by the way, how many times have we heard this intersex argument when we've been watching gender stuff?
Intersex people are usually not given an opportunity to decide for themselves how they wish to live and whether or not they want surgical or hormonal correction. Many intersex people find it appalling that they had no say in such a major life decision, whether or not their gender identity happened to match their assigned sex.
Yeah, this is the return of Toby from the Sally Jesse Raphael show. Sally Jesse Raphael unleashed all of this on all of us via Toby, the non-binary person that was on her show in 1989. We have that Sally to thank for this.
Intersex people are usually not given an opportunity to decide for themselves how they wish to live and whether or not they want surgical or hormonal correction. Many intersex people find it appalling that they had no say in such a major life decision, whether or not their gender identity happened to match their assigned sex. We believe that genital mutilation of intersex children is inherently abusive because it unnecessarily violates the integrity of their bodies without proper consent. The issue is not even whether or not the sex one was assigned matches her or his gender identity. It is whether or not intersex people are given real choice over what happens to their bodies. Trans people feel dissatisfied with the sex assigned to them without their consent according to the simplistic medical standard. Trans people are diverse. Some identify and live as members of the sex different from what was assigned to them by medical authorities, either with or without medical intervention, while others identify with neither or both of male and female sexes. Trans liberation is about taking back the right to define ourselves from medical, religious, and political authorities. Transfeminism views any method of
This is important. Trans liberation, which remember, liberation is what all the queer Marxists want, to be liberated from capitalism. Trans liberation is about taking back the right to define ourselves from medical, religious, and political authorities. What that means is that when conservatives talk about the biological reality of sex, that is always going to fall on completely deaf ears if they're trying to talk to the left. Now, personally, I don't think we should be trying to convince the left of anything. I think far left activists are in a cult. I think they've been brainwashed. I think there is no way that we can unbrainwash them from the cult by saying, you know, biological sex is real, right? Because they do not believe it is real. And furthermore, they believe that their literal liberation, their freedom, that's what that means. Liberation means freedom. Far left activists believe that their freedom is about taking back the right to define ourselves from medical, religious, and political authorities. You have to understand the enemy that you are fighting. If the enemy that you are fighting believes that their very freedom depends on their ability to define what their biological sex is, regardless of what any doctor says or science says, they want to be able to go inside some little internal feeling that they have in the pit of their stomach, and they had some traumatic experience when they were a childhood, and so they really don't want to be a boy. Like, you coming in and saying, well, you know, biological sex is a real thing, that makes no difference at all. And in fact, it's just going to make them double down, because they're going to go, biological sex is a socially constructed category. These people have fundamentally different values than you do. And no, Patrick, brainwashing like this cannot be undone. And I know you guys want to use logic and reason to try to work your way out of this problem. That is not going to happen. You are not going to unbrainwash these people. You cannot get people to leave a cult that they have chosen to be a part of. You cannot free people from a prison that they have chosen to put themselves in. This is a choice for many of these people. They choose who their friends are. They choose who their social circles are. They choose what content they consume. They choose what activities they go to. They choose who they sleep with. They choose who they form relationships with. This is a choice. And a lot of us can say, okay, Karlyn, a lot of these people were introduced to these ideas in childhood, fine, and that's sad and tragic, and I don't believe that it's right to teach these ideas to kids at all. I would ban it and burn all the books if I had my way. But what I'm telling you is, if you are spending all your time trying to wake up leftists, they are not going to wake up. It is not going to happen. Our job is not to unbrainwash the left. Our job is to teach as many people around them what is going on so that they don't get sucked into the cult. Patrick asks, how do we prevent our kids from being brainwashed? Do not send them to public school. Homeschooling. No, the school that you think is good is not good. No, if you live in a red state, it's still not good enough. No, if you live in a red city, it's still not good enough. Do not send your children to public school if you do not want them being indoctrinated into this cult. Period. Full stop.
Transfeminism views any method of assigning sex to be socially and politically constructed, and advocates a social arrangement where one is free to assign her or his own sex.
Hang on, Patrick says, well, that's fine for my kids, but what about the rest of you kids? They're not your job. It is, and I know you don't want to hear this, it is not your job to save every single child. The best thing that you can do is learn as much as you can and then go and teach people in your community what is happening. That is what you can do. You cannot save other people's children. They're not your responsibility. They're the parents of those children. People don't like it when I say this, but it is absolutely true, and Alex is already saying it. Parents are allowed to fuck up their kids. They do it all the time. And if you think that only liberal parents or leftist parents fuck up their kids, I've got a bridge to sell you, because conservative parents fuck up their kids all the time. There is not a single child that gets raised in the entire world that does not in some way get fucked up by their parents. And it is not your job to save other people's kids. If you believe in parental rights, you need to leave other people's kids alone. That's not the answer you want. That's the answer that there is. Why is that the answer? Because protecting parental rights is paramount. The left is trying to abolish parental rights as a form of private property ownership. This is why they attack parental rights all the time. And so if you want parental rights for you, you better damn well defend other people's parental rights to raise their kids however they want, even if they're raising them to be socialists. Because socialists do have kids and they do raise their kids to be socialists. But parental rights for you mean parental rights for everyone else. Our job is to learn as much about this ideology as we can. It is to learn how to teach it to other people. And it is to go out and teach people who are not already sucked into the far left cult. That is what our job is. Our job is not to save other people's children from bad parents, because parents are allowed to screw up their kids. They do it all the time. It is completely legal. People do not want me to say this, but that is the truth. And I think if people are honest with themselves, you can think back to all the ways in which your parents fucked you up that were completely legal. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about things that are illegal. I'm not talking about things you would go to jail for. I am talking about the things that happen in every person's childhood where you get introduced to ideas that fuck you up, that follow you for the rest of your life, and every single person knows what I'm talking about if they're being intellectually honest.
As trans people begin to organize politically, it is tempting to adopt the essentialist notion of gender identity. The cliché popularized by the mass media is that trans people are women trapped in men's bodies, or vice versa. The attractiveness of such a strategy is clear, as the general population is more likely to become supportive of us if we could convince them that we are somehow born with a biological error over which we have no control over it. It is also often in tune with our own sense of who we are, which feels very deep and fundamental to us. However, as trans feminists, we resist such temptations because of their implications. Trans people have often been described as those whose physical sex does not match the gender of their mind or soul. This explanation might make sense intuitively, but it is nonetheless problematic for trans feminism. To say that one has a female mind or soul would mean there are male and female minds that are different from each other in some identifiable way, which in turn may be used to justify discrimination against women. Essentializing our gender identity can be just as dangerous as resorting to biological essentialism. Transfeminism believes that we construct our own gender identities based on what feels genuine, comfortable and sincere to us as we live and relate to others within given social and cultural constraint. This holds true for those whose gender identity is in congruence with their birth sex, as well as for trans people. Our demand for recognition and respect shall in no way be weakened by this acknowledgement. Instead of justifying our existence through the reverse essentialism, transfeminism dismantles the essentialist assumption of the normativity of the sex-gender congruence. Body image consciousness as a feminist issue.
So, hang on.
We as feminists...
The normativity of the sex-gender congruence, they're saying that the goal of transfeminism is to essentially decouple the idea of sex and gender being congruent because it's a normative value that upholds capitalism.
Body image consciousness as a feminist issue. We as feminists would like to claim that we feel comfortable, confident and powerful with our own bodies. Unfortunately, this is not the case for many women, including trans women. For many trans feminists, the issue of body image is where our needs for comfort and safety directly collide with our feminist politic. Many of us feel so uncomfortable and ashamed of our appearances that we opt to remain in the closet or endure electrolysis, hormone therapy and surgical interventions to modify our bodies in congruence with our identity as women. These procedures are costly, painful and time-consuming, and can lead to the permanent loss of fertility and other serious complications such as an increased risk of cancer. Why would anyone opt for such a seemingly inhumane practice? While we might like to believe that the need to match our bodies to our gender identity to be innate or essential, we cannot in honesty neglect social and political factors contributing to our personal decisions. One such factor is society's enforcement of dichotomous gender roles. Because our
Men and women.
identities are constructed within the social environment into which we are born, one could argue that the discontinuity between one's gender identity and physical sex is problematic only because society is actively maintaining a dichotomous gender system. If one's gender were an insignificant factor in society, the need for trans people to modify their bodies to fit into the dichotomy of genders may very well decrease, although probably not completely.
Okay,
However,
so they're kind of saying, like, if the gender binary didn't exist, then there would be no pressure on trans people to get trans surgery, because you don't need trans surgery to be trans, but people feel pressured to get trans surgery so they can fit into the gender binary. So if we just get rid of that pesky gender binary, which means men and women, then you don't have to worry about trans people feeling like they need to get unnecessary surgery in order to be trans.
However, such reasoning should not be used to hold back trans persons from making decisions regarding their bodies. Trans women are extremely vulnerable to violence, abuse and discrimination as they are, and should not be made to feel guilty for doing whatever it takes for them to feel safe and comfortable. Transfeminism challenges us to consider ways in which social and political factors influence our decisions, but ultimately demands that society respect whatever decisions we each make regarding our own bodies and gender expression. It is not contradictory to fight against the institutional enforcement of rigid gender roles while simultaneously advocating for individuals' rights to choose how they live in order to feel safe and comfortable. Nor is it contradictory to provide peer support to each other so that we can build healthy self-esteem while embracing individuals' decisions to modify their bodies if they choose to do so. We can each challenge society's arbitrary assumptions about gender and sex without becoming dogmatic. None of us should be expected to reject every oppressive factor in our lives at the same time. It would burn us out and drive us crazy. Some of our small rebellions combined will destabilize the normative gender system as we know it. Various forms of feminisms, queer activism, transfeminism, and other progressive movements all attack different portions of the common target, which is the heterosexist patriarchy. Violence against women. Feminists have identified since the 1970s violence against women was not merely as isolated events, but as a systematic function of the patriarchy to keep all women subjugated. Transfeminism calls attention to the fact that trans women, like other groups of women who suffer from multiple oppressions, are particularly vulnerable to violence compared to women with non-trans privilege. First, trans women are targeted because we live as women. Being a woman in this misogynist society is dangerous, but there are some factors that make us much more vulnerable when we are the targets of sexual and domestic violence. For example, when a man attacks a trans woman, especially if he tries to rape her, he may discover that the victim has or used to have a male anatomy. This discovery often leads to a more violent assault fueled by homophobia and transphobia. Trans women are frequently assaulted by men when their trans status is revealed. Murders of trans women, like that of prostitutes, are seldom taken seriously or sympathetically by the media and the authorities.
It's literally exactly the same fucking argument they're making today. I have heard this argument so many times, and you'll notice there's no evidence. They're just making statements that support their narrative with no evidence, no statistics, no nothing to back it up.
Murders of trans women, like that of prostitutes, are seldom taken seriously or sympathetically by the media and the authorities, especially if the victim is a trans woman engaged in prostitution. Trans women are also more vulnerable to emotional and verbal abuse by their partners because of their often low self-esteem and negative body image. It is easy for an abuser to make a trans woman feel ugly, ashamed, worthless and crazy, because these are the same exact messages the whole society has told her over many years. Abusers get away with domestic violence by taking away women's ability to define their own identity and experiences, the areas where trans women are likely to be vulnerable to begin with. Trans women have additional difficulty in leaving their abusers because it is harder for them to find employment and would almost certainly lose child custody to their abusive partner in a divorce if there were any children involved. In addition, trans women are targeted for being queer. Homophobes tend not to distinguish between gays and trans people when they commit hate crimes, but trans people are much more vulnerable to attack because they are often more visible than gays. Homophobic terrorists do not look into people's bedrooms when they go out to hunt gays. They look for gendered cues that do not match the perceived sex of their prey, effectively targeting those who are visibly gender deviant. For every gay man or lesbian whose murder makes national headlines, there are many more trans people who are killed across the nation, even though there are far more out gays and lesbians than there are out trans people. Trans men also live in the constant fear of discovery as they navigate in a society that persecutes men who step outside of their socially established roles. Crimes against trans men are committed by strangers as well as by close friends, and are undoubtedly motivated by a combination of transphobia and misogyny, performed as a punishment for violating gender norms in order to put them back in a woman's place. Because of the danger in which we live, transfeminism believes that violence against trans people is one of the largest issues we must work on. We may be hurt and disappointed that some women-only events refuse to let us in, but it is the violence against us that has literally killed us or forced us to commit suicide way too often for way too long. We have no choice but to act immediately. In this regard, cooperation with traditional domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers and hate crime prevention programs is essential. Some shelters have already decided to fully accept trans women just like they would any other women, while others hesitate for various reasons. We must organize and educate existing agencies about why trans women deserve to be served. We must stress that the dynamics of the violence against trans women is not unlike that involving non-trans women, except that we are often more vulnerable. And we should also advocate for services for trans men. As trans feminists, we should not just demand that existing organizations provide services to us, we should join them. We should volunteer to assist them develop an effective screening method in order to preserve safety as they expand their base. We should make ourselves available as crisis counselors and case managers to other trans women in need. We should help them fund trans-specific workshops for their staff too. We should develop self-defense courses for trans women modeled after feminist self-defense.
And all this stuff has
programs
happened.
for women, but which pay special attention to our unique experiences. There may not be enough of us to start our own shelters from scratch, but we can work toward elimination of the violence against trans people in the broader coalition toward the elimination of violence against women and sexual minorities. We must also address the issue of economic violence. Trans women are often in poverty because as women we earn less than men do, because overt discrimination against trans people in employment is rampant, and because of the prohibitively high cost of transitioning. This also means that abusive partners of trans women have more leverage to control and keep us trapped in abusive relationships. Transfeminism believes in fighting transphobia and sexism simultaneously in the economic arena as well as social and political. Health and reproductive choice. It may seem ironic that trans women, who in general have no capacity for bearing children, would be interested in the women's reproductive rights movement, but transfeminism sees a deep connection between the liberation of trans women and women's right to choose. First of all, society's stigmatization of trans existence is partly due to the fact that we mess with our reproductive organs. Non-genital cosmetic surgeries are performed far more frequently than sex reassignment surgeries, yet they do not require months of mandatory psychotherapy. Nor are the ones who pursue cosmetic surgeries ridiculed and scorned daily on nationally broadcast trash talk shows. Such hysteria over our personal choices is fueled in part by society's taboo against self-determination of our reproductive organs. Like women seeking an abortion, our bodies have become an open territory, a battleground. Additionally, the hormones that many trans women take are similar in origin.
That was a comparison of being trans to abortion, which still exists today. If you go to like reproductive justice events, trans and reproductive justice is like inextricably linked.
Additionally, the hormones that many trans women take are similar in origin and chemical composition to what non-trans women take for birth control, emergency contraception, and hormone replacement therapy. As trans women, we share their concerns over safety, cost, and availability of these estrogen-related pills. Trans and non-trans women need to be united against the right-wing tactics aimed at making means and information to control our bodies unavailable, if not illegal. Of course, reproductive choice is not just about access to abortion or birth control. It is also about resisting forced and coerced sterilization or abortion of less privileged women. Likewise, transfeminism strives for the right to refuse surgical and hormonal interventions, including those prescribed for intersex people, and still expect society to honor our sense of who we are. During the 1980s, lesbians were purged from some reproductive choice organizations because they were seen as irrelevant to their cause. But the right to choose is not exclusively a heterosexual issue nor a non-trans issue, as it is fundamentally about women having the right to determine what they do with their own bodies. Trans feminists should join reproductive choice organizations and demonstrate for choice. A society that does not respect women's right to make decisions regarding pregnancy is not likely to respect our right to make decisions about medical interventions to make our bodies in congruence with our gender identity. If we fear having to obtain underground hormones or traveling overseas for a sex reassignment surgery, we should be able to identify with women who fear going back to the unsafe underground abortions. In addition, transfeminism needs to learn from the women's health movement. Research on health issues that is of particular interest to women, such as breast cancer, did not arise in a vacuum. It was through vigorous activism and peer education that these issues came to be taken seriously. Realizing that the medical community has historically failed to address women's health concerns adequately, trans feminists cannot expect those in the position of power to take trans women's health seriously. That is why we need to participate in and expand the women's health movement. Drawing analogies from the women's health movement also solves the strategic dilemma over pathologization of gender identity. For many years, trans people have been arguing with each other about whether or not to demand depathologization of gender identity disorder, which is currently a prerequisite for certain medical treatments. It has been a divisive issue because the pathologization of gender identity disorder allows some of us to receive medical interventions, even though it stigmatizes us and negates our agency at the same time. Before the feminist critiques of modern medicine, female bodies are considered abnormal by the male-centered standard of the medical establishment, which resulted in the pathologization of such ordinary experiences of women as menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause. It was the women's health movement that forced the medical community to accept that they are part of ordinary human experiences. Transfeminism insists that transsexuality is not an illness or a disorder, but as much a part of the wide spectrum of ordinary human experiences as pregnancy. It is thus not contradictory to demand medical...
What? Transsexuality is not an illness or a disorder, but is much a part of the wide spectrum of ordinary human experiences as pregnancy. How many trans people do these people think there are? Oh wait, I already know the answer to that. These people don't think gender exists, so everyone is trans according to these people. Everyone is non-binary according to these people, and non-binary people are the same as trans people according to this document. Therefore, everyone is trans and is just as natural as being pregnant. Holy shit!
Transfeminism insists that transsexuality is not an illness or a disorder, but as much a part of the wide spectrum of ordinary human experiences as pregnancy. It is thus not contradictory to demand medical treatment for trans people to be made more accessible, while depathologizing gender identity disorder. Call for action. While we have experienced more than our share of rejection within and outside of feminist communities, those who remained our best allies have also been feminists, lesbians, and other queers. Transfeminism asserts that it is futile to debate intellectually who is and is not included in the category women. We must act now and build alliances. Every day we are harassed, discriminated against, assaulted, and abused. No matter how well we learn to pass, the social invisibility of trans existence will not protect us when all women are under attack. We can never win by playing by society's rule of how women should behave. We need feminism as much as non-trans women do, if not more. Trans feminists take pride in the tradition of our feminist form.
Wait, trans women need feminism more than real women do. Okay.
Trans feminists take pride in the tradition of our feminist foremothers and continue their struggle in our own lives. Transfeminism believes that a society that honors cross-gender identities is the one that treats people of all genders fairly, because our existence is seen as problematic only when there is a rigid gender hierarchy. In this belief, it is essential for our survival and dignity that we claim our place in feminism, not in a threatening or invasive manner, but in friendly and cooperative ways. Initial suspicion and rejection from some existing feminist institutions are only natural, especially since they have been betrayed so many times by self-identified pro-feminist men. It is through our persistence and commitment to action that transfeminism will transform the scope of feminism into a more inclusive vision of the world. Postscript for catching a wave. Reclaiming feminism for the 21st century.
Okay. That's the end of the Trans Feminist Manifesto. This looks to be an add-on. And the thing is, I don't want to read anymore today. I'm tuning out. I'm not even listening, and that's bad because this episode's gone on for too long. And at some point, we all start to tune out. So we did read, it looks like, the full text of the Trans Feminist Manifesto. There's like an afterword or something that will go on for another 20 minutes. I don't want to listen to that right now. Maybe we can do that another day. What I will do is I will make sure that this document is available in the show notes on the podcast. So if you want to go read it, you are welcome to do it. But this was a little bonus episode. This is like, I'm going to label this episode 10.5. Because this is a little bonus episode. We just wanted to go back and do our historical analysis. And the thing that was most wild about all of this, the document that we just listened to, the Trans Feminist Manifesto, was written in 2001. And it is all the same things that we still hear today. And this is why we do Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, because all these ideas come from somewhere. There is an origin for all of them. And it's important that we understand that, because if you do not understand your enemy, you cannot defeat them. So guys, this is going to conclude our episode for today. And as a reminder, if you would like to support the work I'm doing and keep me in business, because I am 100% funded by you, head over to the Substack. That is Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. You can find back episodes of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club by going to the book club link in the top. You can also find updates and analysis that I'm doing on other things as well. And also make sure, pick up your copy of the Communist Manifesto, A Revolutionary Fairy Tale. If you like books like 1984, Brave New World, or The Hunger Games, or any dystopian story, you're going to like this book. I promise you. Even if you're like, Karlyn, why are we like glorifying the Communist Manifesto? It's not glorifying it. It's not. It's showing the inevitable conclusion of the Communist Manifesto. We just have to tell the story of the Communist Revolution to get to the inevitable conclusion of it, which I do in the book. So pick up the book on Amazon. It's in paperback and Kindle, and go read it because it's awesome. And if you read it, give it a 5-star review because, you know, why not? Make sure you're reviewing stuff when you read it. All right, guys, I will be back tomorrow, and we'll do something fun for happy hour. I cannot believe it's Friday already. I still have to do my taxes. Maybe I'll just postpone my taxes this year. Maybe I don't want to pay taxes anymore. After finding out where my tax money is going to, maybe I just don't want to pay them anymore. Maybe that's why I'm delaying doing my taxes and, you know, whatever. But I literally do this every year. Every fucking year it comes up to the last couple days before taxes are due. And every year, without fail, I'm like, maybe I'm just going to postpone the taxes this year. Maybe I'm just going to like file the form and do it later and blah, blah, blah. And then at the last minute, inevitably, I end up doing the taxes at the last minute because I'm like, fuck this. I just want it done and over with. Yeah, I would have to do taxes for my birthday. I'm not doing taxes on Saturday. I'll tell you that. Anyway. Guys, that is all I have for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.